Hey everybody, welcome to another Techstrong TV broadcast. Today's Monday, December 13th. I am Charlene O'Hanlon and I'm counting down 2 weeks until Christmas. Yay! But we still have lots of work to do before then though. But we've got a great lineup on today's broadcast, and so I hope you can stick around for the entirety of it. We kick things off with a conversation between Alan and Marius Bazinski, who is the Director of Cloud Security Services over at Radware. They talk about some of the holiday cybersecurity threats that folks need to be aware of. Things such as extortions, ransomware attacks on infrastructure and applications, malicious bot activity that depletes inventory, sniping, credit card fraud, account takeover, you name it. They have the 12 days of Christmas cybersecurity threats, if you will. So many of them. It's a great conversation, too. After that, Alan speaks with Shenglong, who is the President of Engineering and Innovation over at SUSE, and they discuss SUSE's acquisition of NewVector, as well as the incubation of Longhorn. Longhorn is actually in incubation status over at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So they discuss some of the advances that SUSE has been making over the last couple of months. It's a great conversation as well. After that, Alan speaks with Joel Stocker, who is the head of product marketing and strategy at ControlUp. ControlUp just recently got funding, $100 million in funding, which is going to be used to advance innovation and further evolve its digital employee experience management platform. This is very, very important, as so many organizations are now offering remote work to their employees. So this platform aims to help make remote work better, giving people the flexibility and freedom to work from anywhere. And we always like that. So it's a great conversation that Joel and Alan have about their technology and how the funding is going to help them achieve their goals. It's a great conversation. After that, we have the Haunted Hacker podcast, and this is a part one of a three-part series. Mike Jones, the host, is speaking with Gary Mary, who is the CEO of Risk Profiler, and together they have a great conversation about leadership in cybersecurity, building teams effectively, some of the struggles that organizations are going through, as well as their cybersecurity employees, the challenges, and some of the successes in cybersecurity. So as always, it is a great conversation, chock full of goodness. So I totally recommend that you check out the Haunted Hacker podcast. After that, I'll be back with the news headlines, as always, and then I have a conversation with Israel Barak, who is the CISO over at Cybereason, and he and I talk about the results of Cybereason's holiday ransomware study. As we approach, as we're smack dab in the holiday season, the threat of another massive ransomware attack looms, and so organizations are concerned, but many are not prepared. That's the part of the findings of the ransomware study. So Israel and I talk about many other results in the study, as well as some of the things that organizations can kind of do to shore up their defenses. After that, I speak with Mike Kaiser, who is from the Strategy and Standards Office of the CTO over at SailPoint. Mike and I discuss SailPoint's recently released Inaugural Trust Issue Survey. This is a really interesting survey. It aims to identify gaps within organizations' cybersecurity postures by analyzing workforce behaviors and those behaviors that blur both the lives between work and professional and home life. Easy for me to say, that can lead to security pitfalls. So this is a very interesting kind of subset of remote work and how organizations, or hybrid work, and how organizations can effectively increase their cybersecurity posture by recognizing some of those employee behaviors that do open them up to vulnerabilities. Great conversation. I really enjoyed that one. After that, I speak with Jimmy Hennessy, who is the Director of Data Science and Software at ACI Worldwide. Jimmy and I discuss fraud management, incremental learning technology, which is an approach to machine learning that enhances fraud protection for merchants and financial institutions. another holiday-focused one, but very relevant given the amount of cyber fraud that is happening these days. Traditional machine learning models need to be retrained as fraud patterns change, but models using incremental learning make small adjustments, small iterative adjustments, which allows the model to adapt itself in production when new behaviors are observed. So this is a different take on the advancement of machine learning and in fraud management. So it's a great conversation. It's a great technology too. It's pretty cool. After that, I have the webinars preview for you. And then I have the Analyst Corner segment with Mitch Ashley. And in this conversation, he speaks with Peter Klimek, who is the Director of Technology over at Imperva in the Office of the CTO. And they talk about API security, application and API security. And Peter offers up some of his predictions for the security landscape and as it becomes even more complex next year. Yikes. Okay, but I'm interested to hear what Peter has to say about that, especially regarding API security. That's a big one. After that, we have The View with Vizard. And in this one, Mike Vizard speaks with Alan Chang, who is the Vice President for Technical Operations at Inspur Systems. And they discuss why AI requires open infrastructure platforms. It's an interesting topic. All right, that is today's lineup on the show. Like I said, it is a good one. I think it's a long one today, too. So we are going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages. All right, welcome back. We've got a great show today, and we're going to kick it off now with a conversation between Alan and Marius Bazinski, who is the Director of Cloud Security Services over at Radware. And they discuss holiday cybersecurity threats 2021. Certainly a relevant topic for these few weeks left before Christmas. So let's go ahead and roll the conversation now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV interview here. I've got a first-time guest for you. His name is Marius Bazinski. Marius is with Radware, and Marius, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Nice to have you on. Marius, as we were talking off camera before we started, we haven't had anyone from Radware on in a while, I think, and so it probably makes sense that we should start off. I think most of our audience knows Radware. Radware is not a new company. It's been in the cyberspace before it was called cyber. But why don't we, maybe for those who aren't familiar and not sure, let's give them a little background.
Absolutely. So Radware is the global market leader in infrastructure and application availability solutions, security solutions, as well as application acceleration. Yeah. So myself in particular, I am responsible for the security side of the business. So my job is to protect my customers every day to make sure their infrastructure and applications are available and ready to do business.
Excellent. And you know what, Marius, maybe a little bit about yourself. What's your title currently at Radware?
So my title is Director of Cloud Security Services.
Excellent. And give us a flavor of your background.
So I've spent over 20 years in IT, most of my life actually for a well-known American company called Cisco, almost 2 decades, where I did a number of things, but eventually migrated towards security, which is what I've been tasked with ever since then. I very much enjoy what I do. I think the topic of security, the topic of availability right now is more important than ever. I think in the times of COVID, where many people are afraid to mix with other people or the restrictions make it impossible to do traditional shopping, I think many businesses see digital platforms as their lifeblood of their survival. So I think it's a more important job than ever. And I think it's more important than ever to ensure that those systems, that digital presence that many companies rely on, is available and ready for what it's designed to do.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So, Marius, we sit here. It's middle of December. In the middle of the holiday season, and I always like to say the bad guys never miss an opportunity to take advantage of a situation, and inevitably, year in and year out, this time of year, we see new scams. We see sort of different takes on old scams. We see old scams that people still fall for. I'm wondering, maybe, from where you sit, what you're seeing, and maybe anything you could do or anything you can help, advice for our audience as we, head into peak holiday season.
Absolutely. So, as most of us prepare to enjoy a little shopping and for pre-Christmas period, for presents for our family, our friends, let me assure you, the cybersecurity professionals are bracing for impact, because indeed, just as retailers want to take advantage of the high shopping season, likewise, cyber criminals are absolutely intent on taking their share of the pie, and they do so by engaging in a number of different nefarious activities. So they will try and break into your accounts so they can spend your miles and loyalty points. They will try and steal your credit card details so they can make purchases on your behalf. They can hold organizations to ransom by making their infrastructure unavailable to do business. And that obviously means every minute costs money. They can be paid by competitors to make it difficult for your organization to do business. I mean, the list is countless, and including my absolute favorite, the Grinch bot, where many cyber criminals will take an entire stock of a popular product, such as the PlayStation 5 or a limited edition Nike sneaker, and immediately sell it at double the price without giving a normal member of society, typical people like ourselves, an opportunity to purchase that product and to have that as a present under the Christmas tree.
Sure. Because they can, right? And this is why we can't have nice things. But so anything kind of in terms of attack surface, in terms of methods or vectors, anything special we're seeing this year?
The truth is, the vectors are not necessarily new. The way attacks are being conducted or disruption is being achieved is not new in terms of technique. We need to recognize that the techniques are, for as long as they work, they will continue to be used. There is no need to be inventive. So what we're seeing is a replay of many of the techniques we already know. So, ransomware, dictionary attacks, trying to break into accounts, bot usage. So we're not seeing new techniques. We are certainly seeing an increase in the number of these events. And I think this is partially driven by the COVID situation and the fact that the digital infrastructure is the primary place to do shopping, but also by the rise in the value of Bitcoin. And we know that Bitcoin is the currency of cybercrime. So when you connect those two issues, I think we're dealing with a perfect storm for cyber criminals. So we're seeing an absolute increase in the level of activity with old, tried and tested techniques being used to achieve those outcomes.
Great. Yeah. I'll tell you my personal, I'm in security also 25 years. What I've been seeing just in the last week or two, number one, a huge increase in, I forget what they call it, but messaging, text message spam, not spam, but text message.
Phishing. Yes.
Phishing, right? And some of it really good, even within our, we have a small company here, Marius. We're only 35, 40 people. But people on my team are getting text messages purporting to be from me, right? That I need you to call this number or go buy this or help that, or, a sort of take on the old one where, hey, I'm stuck and I need your help. I'm in a foreign country and I need money right away or something, right? There's a little bit of a different take on it. I need you to go do this or that. But, clearly, phishing messages, again, you could tell these are English as second language people because their grammar, it leaves a lot to be desired. But, some of them are better than others, certainly. So we're seeing a huge amount of those. Here's another thing, and I wonder if you know anything about this or if anyone in our audience is seeing. I'm seeing a ton of emails coming that purport to be from PayPal or Amazon Prime. Hey, we just put your order through for a new iPhone 13 Pro for $1,300, and call us right away if you want to cancel this. Interestingly, not a link, right? Not a link to click on. They want you to call on the phone. I assume they're looking to prey on people that once they get them on the phone, they'll get them to give their credit card or some other, information out. But I'm seeing a ton of these coming in from all over the place.
That's very true, and I think every single technique that you describe, regardless of how the message is delivered to you, is based on the age-old fact that we as human beings are emotional creatures, right? And when we're faced with an emotional situation, we tend to think with emotion rather than think logically, think safe. A perfect example is when you receive an email from your bank saying, we have noted fraudulent transactions on your account. In order for you to get more information, we need you to authenticate yourself, right? And of course, you're thinking, where is my money? You don't think about, could this be a scam, right? And they capture that emotional reaction. So I think, a golden rule that I can provide in this case is, please, whatever you do, only authenticate yourself when you initiate the contact. Don't ever provide any confidential information when somebody is contacting you, whether it's via an email, whether it's via the phone, via an SMS message. Please, whatever you do, don't give away your personal information, because when someone's calling you, they should be authenticating themselves to you and not vice versa. I think one notable example of where this is different, but I think it's a horrible practice. Certainly in Europe, banks are calling customers proactively to offer them some marketing offers. And when they do that, in order to make sure that the correct offer is applied to the correct market segment, they do ask you to authenticate yourself. But I think it's a horrible practice, because the banks themselves are teaching customers that it's okay to divulge your confidential information when somebody's calling you. So the golden rule never breaks. Don't ever provide confidential information when somebody is asking you to do so. Only do so when you're initiating the contact.
I think that's a good rule. That's a good rule to live by. You mentioned Bitcoin. So let me just say it here. I have not dabbled in cryptocurrency. I'm not an investor in it. I have no horse in the race or anything. But it's such a double-edged sword, because there's so many things that are good about Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, right? The anonymity, the anonymous nature of it, the ability, and all that goes with it. But it's really getting sort of a black eye, right? Because it is the currency of choice for bad guys, right? These people doing these, malactors and stuff. What, if anything, could be done around, the cryptocurrency stuff to kind of take it out of that realm?
Well, I think the single most attractive thing about cryptocurrency is its anonymity when you look at it from a cybercrime perspective. And I think in order to help manage the nefarious activity, we would need to indeed break the anonymity of it all, which not many people would be willing to entertain as an idea in order to gain more control. And I think one of the great examples was when a couple of years ago FBI was pressing Apple to provide the code for its operating system in order for them to be able to get an insight into some cyber criminal activity, and Apple was absolutely adamant. We're not going to do this, right? The security of our operating system is a key selling point for us, and I think this was a very public battle, and I think many articles have been written about this in the US, so I don't need to go into detail. But this is exactly the problem, right? How do you prevent something? How do you give up something good when it's being used by bad people? I think this is something that's going to be very difficult for us to solve. what agencies are trying to do, of course, is to control the conversion of Bitflow into Bitcoin and other currencies into real currency at the exit point from those virtual currency networks. But I think that's all we can do for now. There is, very limited insight we can have into what's happening inside those virtual currency networks and transactions. I think that's something that's going to be very difficult to change.
I don't disagree with you. I think it's just going to be part of the evolution, growing up, maturation of it.
Absolutely.
There's not much we could do there. What about, a lot of, so the e-commerce stuff is always, right? But ransomware has been just a terrible kind of blight, for the last year and a half, especially with this COVID stuff, and that, has become a real moneymaker for Evil Inc. And anything new or good advice for ransomware for our corporate listeners out there?
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, I think many of us recognize ransomware as predominantly that moment when you accidentally click the wrong link and your hard drive gets encrypted and you can't get access to your information. But actually, there are other forms of ransomware. For example, imagine what happens to a retailer when you take down their e-commerce infrastructure, their routers, switches, encryption infrastructure, the transaction application. Every second or every minute of downtime is a significant cost to a retailer who cannot conduct transactions, right? So I think attacking the infrastructure and attacking applications in order to prevent them from doing what they're designed to do, especially when retailers, for example, are most vulnerable and it's those high shopping periods, tends to once again elicit an emotional response and make them more prone to making decisions such as agreeing to pay ransoms. Ransoms that we see, for anyone who's not aware, the approximate value of a Bitcoin today is in the range of $50,000. Now, the ransoms that we see in the wild range from 5 to 50 Bitcoin, with most commonly we're seeing values in the range of the ransom demands in the range of 10 to 20 Bitcoin. So when you look at a ransom, sometimes bringing the cyber criminal income in the range of $500,000 to $1 million for a few weeks' work. That's actually not a bad day at work, right? And I think that is exactly why we're seeing an increase in demand for such services. In fact, you can buy a denial of service attack as a service for not a lot of money. On Darknet, you can purchase 500 gigabits of service over 5 hours for less than $1,000. There are sites being built to provide that to you as a service, right? It's an interesting world, and I think it all comes down to awareness. First of all, people will continue to be the weakest link, right? So I think education, and this will never change. I think organizations need to ensure that periodically they educate their employees how these attacks happen, what mistakes are being made that leads to ransomware attacks, whether it's encryption of your hard drive or otherwise. To educate them not to leave your passwords on a Post-it note stuck to your screen. To educate them not to use the same password for different sites, because sometimes when one site is compromised and your credentials are stolen, they can be purchased on Darknet, and then criminals will try and use those credentials against a number of different sites, taking advantage of the fact that people, to simplify their lives, will often use the same password in different places. So, last but not least, I think it's important really at this stage to say sophisticated technology is being used in addition to old and tried methods to execute ransomware attacks on infrastructure. These are high volume attacks, multi-vector attacks. This is sophisticated technology doing this, large botnets taking part in those attacks. So what's important to remember is that those attacks are almost impossible to fight by hand. You need to deploy sophisticated technology to make sense of what's happening to you and to fight the technology being used against you. And I think the days when it could be done by hand, by human beings, are over. You must take a serious look at investing into sophisticated technology to fight the crime.
Agreed. because it's sophisticated technology they're using to commit the crime. Hey, Marius, we're over time already, but for people who want to get more information, maybe about Radware, where it's radware.com, RADWARE?
Absolutely. Radware.com is the site that I'd like everyone to visit from time to time. We have a lot of information about the different attacks that we're seeing, statistics, how to protect yourself. We also offer a range of technology which is market leading in its way, in the way it protects infrastructure and applications from suffering some of the challenges that we described during our conversation today.
Excellent. Thanks for stopping in, Marius. Come back maybe after the holidays. Come back on. We'll catch up. We'll be, of course, getting ready for the RSA event in February. We'll be out there again, and we'll make some announcements around that. We'll be doing our DevSecOps event there. But thanks for joining us on Techstrong TV today.
It's my pleasure, and I'd like to take the opportunity to wish everybody a safe shopping holiday. Until next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Marius Bazinski. I messed that one up. Marius Bazinski, Radware, here on Techstrong TV. We'll take a break. We'll be right back.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, welcome back. Next up, Alan has a conversation with Shen Long, who is the President of Engineering and Innovation over at SUSE. And they discuss a few things, SUSE's acquisition of NewVector for one, and the incubation of Longhorn over at the CNCF. Great conversation about some great technology. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV interview. I am really pleased to have my friend Sheng Liang back on here. I know Sheng a long time, man, and he's been a regular on Techstrong TV. I think ever since we started, when COVID started, and I've been interviewing Sheng longer than that. Hey Sheng, a pleasure to have you back on. You look well.
I'm glad to see you. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. And Sheng, I don't want to mess it up, but since Rancher Labs joined SUSE, your role obviously changed. We've interviewed you several times since then. Is it VP of Platform? I forget your exact title.
Yeah,
you want to remind us?
The role I assume that SUSE is called President of Engineering and Innovation. So
beautiful.
So by that, I manage all of SUSE's engineers. So not just Kubernetes engineers, but also Linux engineers. And SUSE has been, in business for 30 years. It's one of the largest Linux distributors and IT vendors in the world, and they've got a very rich history in open source innovation. Everything we do is 100% open source, so Rancher fits into it really well. And we're just continuing to push our technologies and innovations forward.
Yep, excellent. And Sheng, it's a great title, but it's also a great role, and you're the right man for it. When we look at SUSE, I think you're right. The way you mentioned it, a lot of people, SUSE, Linux, SUSE. They think, everyone knows it's a great Linux distribution. But SUSE is really so much more, right? Though a lot of what they do winds up being included in their Linux distro, Rancher Labs, and a bunch of the Rancher open source projects and services is a great example. of how they, have been incorporated into SUSE and the SUSE distro. More recently, SUSE recently acquired another company that I'm familiar with, New Vector. Stephanie Phone was the CEO there. Stephanie's an old friend of mine, and congratulations to her and the whole New Vector team. But New Vector really had a great story around Kubernetes security, around cloud native. Why don't you give us a little insight there, Sheng?
Yeah, so SUSE is really building a great cloud native platform, all the way from Linux to Kubernetes. And obviously, as you said, SUSE Linux is a time proven leading enterprise Linux brand. So on the Kubernetes side, actually even before SUSE and Rancher merged, SUSE already had some products around Kubernetes and Cloud Foundry. But since the merger, some of the existing earlier SUSE products actually got merged into Rancher, so it got Rancher even richer. I mean, Rancher, as all of you know, is an industry-leading container management platform. So Rancher has really many things now in the whole product suite. It has Kubernetes distros. It actually has two Kubernetes distros. One's called RKE for the on-premise data center Kubernetes distro, and we have an edge Kubernetes distro called K3S. But once you have so many Kubernetes clusters everywhere, you need a centralized multi-cluster management platform to manage them all. And that's what Rancher is. So we pioneered. At Rancher, we actually created this category of products, which now I think spread to multiple vendors. Like you have one place you go to manage a lot of Kubernetes clusters, right? So it kind of becomes a platform. It becomes a distributed computing platform, which is a great way to allow us to add additional capabilities on top. And security is a very, very important set of capabilities that our customers are looking for. Once they put Kubernetes in production at large scale, one of the pressing concerns is, they want to make sure that all the CVEs are patched, all the policies are implemented, all the images are scanned, all the runtime parameters are set correctly, and all the anomalies are detected. So it kind of becomes a big challenge. And we looked at the market. These New Vector guys, they spent years perfecting a runtime security platform built on some of the very unique technologies around, like network. They actually started as network engineers around like deep packet inspection, build a great set of capabilities around that. So by bringing them on board, what we're going to do is we're going to ship New Vector going forward as open source. It probably takes a few months to get there, but once New Vector is open source, you can imagine it kind of becomes a great choice for Kubernetes users to just deploy New Vector. And then for Rancher users, New Vector would be just a great add-on to add security capabilities onto Rancher or other Kubernetes platforms.
Excellent. Now, the New Vector acquisition, I believe, was last month already.
Yeah.
Like every other acquisition, there's a timeline. When do you think we'll see some of this New Vector technology sort of really integrated into the SUSE?
It will probably take a few months. So New Vector already has a fairly mature and shipping product, so it continues to ship. So what we're trying to do are two things. One, we want to clean up the code a little bit, review it, inspect it, so that the code is available as open source. And that fits into SUSE's open source based business model. So that, again, would happen in a few months. But the other angle is today, New Vector already runs as an add-on to Rancher, but as a separate product. Like it looks a little different, authentication is a little bit different. So we're kind of just working out a few points of integration. So New Vector would always be available everywhere on every Kubernetes management platform, whether it's Rancher, OpenShift, or Tanzu. It really doesn't matter. But we want to make it so that with Rancher, you get an even simpler, even more consistent integrated experience. Because after all, New Vector and Rancher all belong to SUSE. And it is really both are going to become part of SUSE's container management platform.
Excellent. So congratulations on that acquisition, Sheng. Let's look, we'll pull back out 50,000 feet. What else is happening at SUSE? I know you guys are intimately involved with the cloud native computing movement and as part of your open source. What else, new information coming out of SUSE?
Oh, I mean, we SUSE is a leader in open source innovation and open source development. Just about everything we do is open source. And this kind of innovation is happening across the board. Given cloud native and container is at the very forefront of the technology development. So a lot of our open source technologies tend to be in the area of open source. Some of the projects we've had for a long time, like Project Longhorn, which we contributed to CNCF a couple of years ago, has achieved recently, Project Longhorn achieved incubation status. That's a big deal. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Incubation was where Kubernetes or Prometheus started. It's kind of like, CNCF, the way it's set up is there are a lot of sandbox projects. It's relatively easy to become a sandbox project, but it doesn't really imply the project is ready for production use, widespread production use. Once a project moves from sandbox to incubation, it actually represents a fairly strong form of endorsement from CNCF. We've been working on the Longhorn project for literally 6-7 years. It takes 6-7 years to truly build a mature storage system. Storage systems are hard. So I'm so happy that Longhorn finally achieved this milestone and be read and can be used, by a variety of users and customers. And then based on Longhorn, we built another project called Harvester. It is the world's first open source hyper-converged infrastructure platform. And hyper-converged infrastructure has been so successful. It is a de facto deployment form factor for private cloud. And we have great solutions like VMware and Nutanix, and these are very, very successful products. But interestingly, there hasn't been a open source alternative, open source implementation for those very, very successful hyper-converged infrastructure products. So Harvester is the first one, and then we're very excited. Harvester is very close to GA now, and we look forward to continue to develop and improve Harvester next year. And the last thing might deserve a mention is a piece of innovation, actually for containers, but it actually came out of the Linux side of the business, and it's called BCI, a base container image. So what it's inspired by Red Hat UBI. It's in UBI's case, it's a set of rail-based images that are certified to run on rail. Whereas SUSE, it's a set of SLES-based images. But one thing we did a little bit differently from Red Hat is we will support and certify BCI running on any Linux operating system. So that just makes it so much easier. It's an enterprise-grade container image. And then once you build it with BCI, and SUSE will support you to run on any base enterprise-grade container system. So you can run SUSE BCI on SLES, of course, but also on Rail, also on CentOS, also on Ubuntu. So that is at the end of the day, portability is the essence of Linux containers. And I'm extremely excited about the BCI work that our team has done in the last few months to make that a reality.
That's great stuff. Sheng, as we look ahead to 2022, and God willing, this COVID thing calms down. I know Valencia is the next big Cloud Native Con, KubeCon. That's in May.
Yeah.
So we're still 5-6 months out. What gets you excited these days around the whole open source cloud native world? I mean, obviously Longhorn is your baby, right?
Harvester, Longhorn, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
what else do you see out there?
CNCF really represent to me continuous innovation. I'm on the TOC of CNCF. We
Right.
evaluate a lot of projects coming in, want to be part of CNCF, most of them at the sandbox level. So, and the projects really spread all over the place from runtime capabilities to security to monitoring, operations, AI ops, developer services. It's the CNCF ecosystem as vibrant as ever. We have many more times the number of projects as we had years ago. So I see that continue to grow, and I really want SUSE to play our role in enriching this whole cloud native ecosystems as well. So besides these projects I talked about, besides projects like Longhorn, like NewVector, like Harvester, we're working on many more projects. The one that I'm actually particularly excited is an AI ops project. We call it OPNI, OPNI, and it's been out there for a while. It hasn't really been officially, we haven't officially made a lot of noise about it. But like open source projects, it just develops in the open. And I think those guys have made a lot of good progress. Just the ability to, using the latest the machine learning, deep learning technology to understand all the logs and the events that are coming out of a Kubernetes cluster, both for the underlying infrastructure and for application behavior, then use that to detect anomalies and in many cases actually recommend actions to isolate the issue and fix the issue. So I think as Kubernetes becomes mature, the AI technology could be a great tool organizations can use to help them tame the complexity of the overall system.
Excellent. Sheng, we're running low on time. I know you can go to SUSE.com, right? But to stay on top of some of the developments that you've mentioned, should they just go to the SUSE.com site?
Yeah, SUSE.com, SUSE open source. Where is everywhere, We have websites for these things. We have community blogs for a lot of things we're doing. And these days, really, as long as terms like SUSE, cloud native, Kubernetes, open source, and if you happen to remember some of these project names, then you go directly for the projects. Otherwise, you'll get to a landing page with all of these projects listed.
Excellent. Sheng, as always, a pleasure having you on. Congratulations on the NewVector acquisition. Congratulations on all the progress. Keep doing what you do, man. You're a workhorse in that cloud native community. Thank you for coming on today.
Thanks, Alan, for the opportunity to come on and talk about what I like to talk about, which is the innovation and technology in projects. Thank you very much.
You can come on anytime.
Thank you,
Sheng Liang, SUSE, President of Innovation and Engineering.
That's right.
Or Engineering and Innovation. Thanks for being our guest on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with another guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, Alan speaks with Joel Stocker, who is the head of product marketing and strategy over at ControlUp. ControlUp has a digital employee experience management platform that aims to help remote workers' lives easier, do their jobs better, and give them the freedom basically to work from anywhere. And the company just garnered $100 million in funding. So Alan and Joel discuss the company, its technology, and what it's going to do with the $100 million in funding. I expect great things out of this one. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another segment on Techstrong TV. I have a guest for you this segment. His name is Joel Stocker. Joel is with ControlUp, and I don't think we've ever had anyone from ControlUp on Techstrong before. So Joel, it falls on you to kind of tell the ControlUp story. Let's hear it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alan, for having me. And so ControlUp has been around for a little bit over a decade. And for the majority of that time, we've been very focused on providing better experiences for customers running VDI, DAS, so think Citrix and VMware Horizon kind of environments. And that has always been our focus. And over the last probably year and a half, we kind of moved over and have a much more stronger focus on a much broader set of digital employee experience, no matter if you're running VDI or SaaS applications or physical endpoints. And we're really in the business of helping customers provide a better kind of like daily experience for their employees working with technology in the workplace.
Got it. You know, it's funny. I remember Wang workstations, so I'm old, right? But you know, what percentage of the market would you say is still on VDI?
I think the numbers I've seen, for example, from Gartner, I think it's probably about 15 to 20%.
Really?
What you do see is that it's shifting, right? So where everybody did this on premises, now people are moving to DAS, for example, platforms like Microsoft Azure AVD, as well as some other vendors. So it's fairly steady. But now you see kind of, especially after last year, right, where all of a sudden the whole world needed to work remotely, you do see a little bit of an uptake, but you also see this transition from on-premises to cloud.
Got it. So Joe, you know, ControlUp is at this, as you mentioned, over a decade, 13 years. But you guys recently announced, a rather large raise. Why don't you tell our audience, share with our audience a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So we last month in November, we completed our D round for $100 million across two of our investors, K1 and JVP. And that is mostly because, where we traditionally were in this VDI space, which is not a high growth market, we started changing over the past years to investing in the overall digital experience. So now we're bringing in physical endpoints, we're bringing in SaaS application monitoring. We have a synthetic testing monitoring tool as well. And that is something that, as a new market, is high growth, and that $100 million investments should help us to further strengthen our product portfolio, but also going after certain markets, for example, the DevOps market, where we previously haven't really played in. So it's exciting times for us.
Absolutely, and $100 million is nothing to sneeze at. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So you mentioned that this will allow you to play in the DevOps market. You mentioned a little bit about SaaS and so forth. Let's dive into that. How do you envision sort of getting into this DevOps market now? What are the solutions, services that you'll have there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the kind of VDI space has always been very focused on kind of the infrastructure, right? So this is IT infrastructure, server infrastructure, and we do that very well. But the reality is that users today, employees today, working from their home office or a flex spot, and maybe they go into the office. Now, the core of their set of applications is either SaaS-based or unified communications, right? Zoom, WebEx, and Teams. And these applications are typically being delivered by different teams. So not the typical IT infrastructure team, but more application ops, IOps, and DevOps. And we feel that to be able to present our customers with a better understanding of how customers or their employees are using it, but also if they have any issues in performance and availability, that completes that DEX, the digital employee experience picture. And so that is really where we are now. So this involves true end-to-end testing of SaaS applications from the client, the browser to the backend, but not only performance, but also availability. So synthetic testing, for example, will play a role in that as well.
Got it. And how developed are these solutions, or like how close are they to coming to market and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so our synthetic transaction testing tool has been on the market for a year and a half. This started off as synthetic testing, again, for Citrix and VMware Horizon environments, but last year we already added a SaaS application and network testing to that. So that is kind of like on the back end. Now, on the front end, where the user sits, over the next couple of quarters, you will see that we will add functionality around browser extensions, testing kind of more from the end user's point of view, because that will really complete that picture. So we're very close, might even be next quarter already, but we're kind of like working currently on the timing for the release of those technologies.
That's excellent. And Joel, $100 million, I mean, that enables a lot of development, right? A lot of product development. But what else are you doing? What else are the funds being used for?
So we don't have it like fully clear yet, but there is as you indicate, the kind of product development either through buy or build. But then there's also making sure that the people who are actually in the field talking about this with customers are ready for this. So we're also investing in expanding our sales organization, investing in things like enablement and readiness so that they know what story to tell. And when you go after a new part of the market, you have new people and you have different stories. So we want to make sure that we don't kind of like pivot all at once, right? That we make sure that the people who are talking about this with customers from pre to post sale, that they actually, are ready for that as well. So that is a part of the investment there as well.
Got it. Sounds great. And Joel, I guess part of the mission is while you're out there, clearing new fields to grow, you got to make sure that the home base is well fed, right? That you continue the VDI, type of product line and stuff like that. You see anything, with the switch, obviously, as you mentioned earlier, to remote, office work and stuff like that, cloud-based, any new product development on that horizon?
So absolutely. So we know where our customers are, right? So our loyal customers for the last decade plus, live in this VDI space, and we definitely keep on developing there. And the most kind of like close as far as the roadmap is something that's coming in the January-February timeframe is further support for Microsoft Azure and Microsoft AVD. So we do see a lot of customers now finally kind of investing in kind of like the desktop as a services, and Microsoft definitely being a leader vendor in there. We feel that we have a lot to do there. So there's some great developments happening there.
Very good. Joe, we didn't mention, people want to find out more about ControlTop. What's the website?
So controlup.com is our website. So if anybody wants to learn more about our technologies or even try our technology, we are fairly unique. You can literally click on download and it starts downloading. No forms to fill out. You can also get a test account without any hassle for our synthetic transaction monitoring tool. So that is really the place where you want to start.
And that's the way it should be today, right? Get the software into people's hands. If they want it, they'll buy it.
Exactly. And, it's still a lot of companies are still, you have to fill out a form and then you have to talk to a salesperson and all. No, it's like literally, click on a button and you're ready to go.
Excellent. And where is ControlOp based?
So our headquarters are in Israel. So that is where our founders live and where a lot of our back office and a lot of our engineering teams are. But as far as our market, the United States is very important, but we work across the world in Europe, in Asia Pacific, but we have a big presence here in the United States. But headquarters is still in Israel for us, and I haven't been there yet because during the lockdown, I started COVID, at the beginning of the lockdown. So yeah.
Well, I've been to Israel many times, but not since COVID either. So let's hope this year's the year, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Though it seems like every few months there's a new story about what the latest thing. But anyway, Joel, I want to thank you for coming on and telling us about ControlOp, and congratulations to you and the whole team on this raise.
Thank you.
We'll be looking forward to seeing how this plays out in the market.
Absolutely, and thank you for having us, and I'm looking forward to talking to you again.
Anytime. All right, Joel Stocker here on Techstrong TV from ControlOp. Check them out. We're going to take a break now. We'll be right back with another guest.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, we've got the Haunted Hacker podcast. In this one, host Mike Jones. This is for part one of a three-part conversation that Mike has with Gary Mary, who was the CEO of Risk Profiler. And they discuss a whole slew of cybersecurity topics, including leadership and ways to build effective cybersecurity teams, as well as the struggles, challenges, and successes in cybersecurity. As always, it is a fantastic conversation. So let's go ahead and roll it.
Welcome to the Haunted Hacker podcast number 42.1 for Gary Mary. A little bit of news before we get started. I just spoke for DHS last week. Next week is ISSE, which is part of EMA.org, think tank in Europe. I'll be speaking on their think tank. Other than that, not a whole lot of earth-shattering news. So we have a special guest today, Gary, who we've crossed paths in the past, maybe not at the same time, but similar places and similar people. Has a really interesting background. So Gary, why don't you introduce yourself and give us a little bit of your background? And it's great to have you, by the way.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Kim. Yeah, my name's Gary Mary. I had an amazing journey in technology. I started out on a farm in Missouri, read a bunch of, Jack London books and all of that, and joined the Marine Corps. And, after the Marine Corps, decided that it's time to go to college, and I've been in technology ever since. And really, if anything, cybersecurity has been the culmination of everything before it. And so even getting here, running a cybersecurity company, and actually my third cybersecurity company, it's all built on what I did, before this. I was a coder, I was a C guy, then later begrudgingly C++. Never could manage it, but I coded in it. So yeah, it's been a great journey. I've done some really amazing things, and some of the stuff I want to talk about today. You know, some of the things you hear about, and you know, why don't we? Why don't they? Why can't they? Why isn't the CIO in the boardroom? Why isn't you know, why aren't they listening to me? I got the volume all the way to 11. No one's listening to me. Why aren't they listening to me? And I've done all of that. I've turned the volume all the way up. I've been in boardrooms. I've been ignored, and I've been listened to. So, you know, running across you, Chris Roberts, Kim, and you know, if anything, I'm a collector. I'm a collector of ideas. I'm a collector of thinkers. And every once in a while, I'll find a thinker like yourself, Kim, Chris Roberts, and I kind of, you know, latch onto them. And you know, there's so much redundancy today. People are saying the same things over and over and over. And when you can find somebody who's, you know, kind of thinking well and not just repeating and not just this cookie cutter thing, you know, you kind of try to get close and see what they're up to. So that's how you and I kind of got together. I saw something that you had done. I'd seen a couple of your podcasts, and I was like, listen, I want to pay attention to this guy. I want to know what Haunted Hacker is all about. And so, even though I've been kind of lurking out in Discord for a while, but getting a chance to meet you, Kim, is awesome. I really appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, you bring up a good point. You know, there's those of us who don't speak or don't actually drink like the Kool-Aid and the buzzwords, and you know, it comes with its blessings and its curses, right? So,
yeah.
You know, if you don't think the same as everybody else, then you tend to stick out a little bit more and become a target. But you also, you know, people remember what you say and people listen to what you say because it's not blended into the noise.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, innovators are almost always criticized. And in today, you think that we could grow beyond that, especially cybersecurity, where lessons need to be learned, right? I mean, one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest challenges we have, guys, is that we're not able to learn from everybody else's mistakes. So it's like somebody invented the wheel, but we don't know about it because they can't talk about it. They won't talk about it. The reason they won't talk about it is because they can't. It's not that easy. So they do the turtle defense. They pull in their arms and legs and shut up their shell, and nobody learns from them. And so, in fact, I was watching a survey that Chris Roberts had done, and somebody had said something negative, like, why do people respond to these? And I was thinking to myself, you know, why do I follow them? Why do I take time out of my day to do that? Is because, you know, like I said, I'm a guy who collects and learns. And there were, you know, out of that one little conversation, I ended up with, you know, a new Discord server that I was a member of and like 3 new connections. And so, yeah, you know, unless you're listening, you won't learn. And if you're just speaking the gospel as you've heard it, you're not gonna move us forward. You're not gonna move cybersecurity forward. Cybersecurity needs unique thinkers, and it needs people who aren't afraid and who aren't afraid to participate and talk. I mean, I love your magazine and the Haunted Hacker brand. You know, shedding some light on other people's mistakes is a big deal. Like I said, if you can't learn, you know, from other people's mistakes. I was reading the RSA breach just, I don't know, a couple of months ago about the RSA breach. It was such a closed box. I didn't know all the stuff that went on. I don't remember who wrote it, who wrote the article. Maybe it was Dark Reading or something like that. But oh my God, did you read that? Did you read that whole account of that? Well, you probably already knew all of it, but the rest of us didn't. It was fascinating.
It's the same like the pipeline, Colonial Pipeline. You know, what we heard on the news was not totally the true story, like the full story. And there's a lot of things that people don't understand about the economy and the dichotomy of ransomware and that whole environment. So we hear like top level stuff, but you don't really hear like the meat of the problems unless you go out and search for it and listen to people, even though, you know, some of their ideas may be against the grain. But there's always something good to pull away. And that's the way I look at it. So me and Chris have been friends for a very long time. And he's one of those guys that he's going to speak his mind. and not somebody else's. And that's what I appreciate about him. And that's the way I try to carry myself is I listen to what everybody has to say because there's always a jewel hidden somewhere in what they're saying. And I take what I can, I leave the rest. But I don't criticize. I don't criticize people participating and getting out there and putting information out there. I know there's a bad habit in cybersecurity where people will make a post based on their experience or what they know. And there's always that one person who comes in and tries to tear them down. And I'm just like, instead of going out there and smashing all these people, why don't you yourself take some time and put yourself out there and see what it's like to share and get that feedback.
Or ask a question. I love asking questions. I mean,
and failing's part of it. I think that a lot of people haven't had that experience because they're not brave enough to take that risk. I failed many times. So I was a CISO for a company in Scotland, and literally they brought me in as a CISO so that they could get into a couple of the financial magazines. And then after that, I never got paid. So it's one of those risks that you take, and you don't really expect that outcome. But I'm smarter for having gone through that. And I think in cybersecurity, we fail quite a bit. But things have become stagnant because if you look at the defense platforms, not much has changed over the past 20 years. They're a little bit advanced algorithms, a little bit, more bells and whistles, but it's still that reactive, semi-proactive look. I think it got stale after IPS. And it's because we don't have people who are willing to take that risk and innovate something that is completely different. And I haven't seen that a lot.
Yeah, you couldn't be more right. I mean, taking the risk, putting yourself out there is part of that. And, listening to other people's mistakes and other people's I love hearing what somebody else has done wrong, even though I know I've done just as many because we're all humans and we all have X amount of mistakes we're going to make in our lives, no matter what, where, or who you are. And, learning and trying to not make the same mistakes. That's the thing that's amazing to me in cybersecurity. You have to read an article that's 4 months old of an event and you're thinking, well, do we do that? And you find out you do that. And you're like, we've been doing it longer than they did. And it just didn't happen to us. So I think these kind of podcasts, these kind of dialogues, are super important. And, when somebody hands you the microphone, it's important that you take that opportunity to say things like what we're talking about. Look, sure, I've done this and I've done that, but I've also screwed up a time or two, and this is how I did it. And these other times kind of worked okay. But, I think as technologists, I think we're typically kind of critical of ourselves and of everything. And it's hard to break that mold. It's hard not to think, oh man, come on, it can't be that easy or it can't be that bad. But it's just a battle. It's a constant battle, even for me. And I'm a collector of ideas and people with unique thoughts. And, like you said, not much has changed. And so when you hear somebody see something a little bit different, you kind of perk up. And you're like, well, wow. And I can tell you, I was a CIO. And I remember we spent all this money. I can't tell you how many millions and millions of dollars on technology I spent. And every time we we saved the company, which we saved the company multiple times just because somebody would walk up to me and say, hey, did you know we do this? Or did, this buddy of mine heard? And you're like, really? And then you get your CISO and you're like, hey, do we do this? And they're like, I doubt it. And I'm like, well, prove it to me. And, that human intelligence and that human intelligence, what do you call it? Human, yeah. Is paramount. Mm-hmm. I was at a conference in New York. Man, this is good. The good news is that the company's not around anymore. But I was at a conference. This guy says to me, he says, he's kind of giggling. He says, I heard you lost your keys. And I was like, I'm not thinking a couple drinks in. I'm thinking, what's he talking about? I thought he picked up my hotel room key on the ground or something. Mm-hmm. And he says, no, I heard you lost your encryption keys. And I was like, bullshit. You know, that didn't happen to me. You don't lose keys. You don't carry them in your pockets. You don't just leave them on your counter or forget where you left them or whatever. I called my CISO. I was like, hey, this person is telling me this. And they're like, nah, it's bullshit. There's no way that happened. So I go back and I call this guy up on it. And I call his bluff. I say, look, you know, it's not cool. It's not funny. It's not anything, man. You know, he goes, no, I know I was kind of laughing, but I thought you knew it. Short story long, we had an intern who was going to write a paper, and the paper was how much stuff could he take from a company as an intern and get away with it. And he was going to write a paper about this. And so the way we found out about it was the guy who told me this, I don't want to mention too many names, said, well, you're a guy from POS support. And he said his first name. Let's just pretend it was Steve. Oh. He said, Steve. So I called back, and they're like, I called my head of POS, and he says, we don't have anybody named Steve. Get a hold of HR. We look around. Come to find out, we find this kid, get him in a conference room. And he's like, yeah, that's what I did. You know, I did. I called the POS provider, and they gave me the encryption keys. They gave them to me. And all I did was, because my caller ID was equal to my company, they said, oh, since his caller ID was from the company, they thought he worked in POS support. They took our keys. Wow. Yeah, we had to call the FBI because there was a couple other people involved. And point being is that I would not have known any of that unless somebody had said something to me. And it's the technology, you got to have it. It's foundational, but your ears and your eyes are your best asset, even in cybersecurity.
Yep, absolutely. And getting to know your employees as people and not just as employees is another good point. I preach that all the time when I give talks, and people say, you know, what's one thing that you would change in 2021? And then I'll get the next question, the same question next year. What would you change in industry in 2022? And it's always the same. I would tell people to look at their employees as people and not as numbers or just employees, because they can be your biggest asset if you have a good relationship, or they can be your worst nightmare if you don't have a good relationship. Yep. And I think we've gotten away from the human factor. We've gotten away from human touch and that relationship in the workplace, because not only do we work from home, but all the technology that we put in between us. And I think that in order to be successful as an industry, we're going to have to get back to, you know, the bare knuckles. We're going to have to look at people and relationships and realize how important they are, and foster them more, and build a culture. That's one thing that I seem to not be able to find in a lot of companies nowadays is culture. I remember back in the day, you worked for, I guess, what used to be Sane Corporation.
It's still Sane Corporation. It's still alive.
So they had like a really unique culture back in the day. I had been using Saint since it was Satan and so on and so forth. And Billy Austin was a good friend of mine. And I saw that culture that they bred there in Maryland and just within the group itself. And that's kind of what I look for. So like in my company now, I have Luke Pyro Makomi that pulled me into his group at Blue Bastion. And it's a great culture. We have some of the best hackers in the industry that work on the red team, but it's not the work and it's not building of the teams. It's the relationships, and everybody there is friends from some other place, whether it be another company, whether it be the industry itself. But we were friends before we were coworkers, and I think that helps a lot as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you get in a hurry. You only got so many hours in your day. The bigger your job is, the less hours you have, the less in control you are, and you forget, about that part. And now, now we have. And so you think, well, the technology is going to make my decisions for me now. And I'm a guy that's currently playing in the AI arena. And now we think AI is maybe the answer, this sort of pseudo human thing. So maybe that's going to put even more distance, which just is the snake eating its own tail. You think, well, here we are, if your employees aren't part of the solution. They're the problem. They are the problem. And as you said, the culture is the problem. And you're talking about Saint, there's a guy there named Sam Klein. He's been there forever. And, that culture is just sort of revolves around him and his unbelievably deep knowledge of vulnerability management and technology and things like that. I love that guy. All the companies I've worked for, I've always meet these people like the Sam Kleins that are, I'm just always amazed at their clarity. And it just doesn't seem to, we just can't seem to commoditize that. We can't seem to teach it. We can't seem to inherit it. I mean, I was working with a company we took from just a small regional little retailer to a multi-billion-dollar powerhouse, and we sold it to another company. And in less than a year, it was gone. In 2 years, they were delisted. Both companies just dissolved. I mean, they still have some retail outlets, but in the end, they just absolutely crushed and collapsed into the ground. It was culture, 100% culture versus culture. When those two didn't come together, all was lost. Always lost from day one.
Yeah, so one thing interesting, we worked at another place, a mutual place, Bank of America.
Yeah.
And that culture was very unique. I'm actually still close friends with a lot of people who still work there. And I found that culture to be really cohesive and dynamic and flexible. And it really paved a way into what is now my career. But I mean, those people there, like Dan and Tilly and some of those guys, they built those teams around people, not roles. And I think that is the key to a lot of good decision making is, you may have roles and requirements, but why not identify the people that you've seen or that you've spent time with or that you've worked with and build a role around that person? Because you already know that person inside and out, and they can create that role. And the best jobs I've ever had is when people come to me and say, "Hey, Mike, we want you on our team. Here's a piece of paper. Write down your role." And so I'd write my role, and that would be my job. And it's probably the best jobs I've ever had is when my personality and challenges and skills can dictate what that role is.
Yeah. One of the challenges of being a CEO is that you think, well, I got to put my culture. It's got to be my part of my culture. It's me. And it's one of the things about being a modern CEO. It's so cool. It's so much better, I think, than it used to be. In that you get the flexibility to not necessarily you can absorb the Sam Klein or the Roberts or anybody like that's culture and build off of it. It used to be, it had to be, if you were the CEO, it was your culture. You talk about Bank of America, we had Hugh McCall because I was on the Nation's Bank side and talking about a character and talking about a culture and really smash mouth banking. But it was a very close, tight knit organization. And I think it probably still is today. I still have a lot of friends from there. But I don't know how many people. I don't really know anybody who's still part of that team. Banking is a roller coaster ride, man. You got to hold on, and tighten up.
And the threats and the emergencies that we used to have is crazy. I actually followed one of my mentors at Bank of America on to two different companies. Dennis Schmidt. He was in technology, and I ended up following him to ShoreTel and became their director of security over there. But it's those relationships, I think, that really have furthered my career more than anything. Being able to work with people that I care for, But I think there's a lot more problems in the industry other than just not recognizing people for people. I think it's the whole culture of we have this unidentified skills gap, and I've yet to see this gap in real life. Like I know that they say it exists, but I don't think we have a skills gap. I think we have a hiring gap. I think the way that we put roles out there and requirements, we're requiring these kids to have all these certifications for an entry-level job. What kid has $5,000 to drop for certification? We're asking way too much. And then when I see some of these mid-level jobs, it kind of cracks me up because, they'll start out with, okay, let's say, take my role, for example, and this wasn't the way it was, but MDR manager, right? And then when you look at the requirements, they would have like a literal block of requirements of, you have to know C++, you have to know this, you have to know that.
Yeah.
They expect you to know all these things, but pay you for about that much. And I think that's the biggest failure in the industry right now, is be able to look at how we hire, look at the supposed gap and skills gap and open jobs that we can't fill, and figure out why. It's not because there's not enough people out there. It's because of what we're requesting of those people, I think.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. Behind every one of those recs, behind every one of those requirements, there's somebody in technology that's writing that, right? HR didn't write those things. So I don't know I don't know why that's so prevalent. I'll tell you, I'm a huge fan of the folks that go to the technical colleges and things like that. And I do quite a bit of mentorship around community colleges, and they've got amazing technology. And usually the adjunct professors who are teaching there are no fooling, technologists that are doing some good work. But I think that maybe in corporate America, that's not changing as much as we want. But I guarantee you, in the startups, and where people are starting to, like my guys I have now, or even back in Saint or before that, when I had started a company that I later sold called Deep Run. I didn't care. I could care less what school you went to. All I wanted to know was, hey, what kind of a person were you? Mm-hmm. Can you come in and be part of the culture? Because you can't pretend to be part of the culture if it's not who you are. Right. It's better for you to say, no, I don't. It's probably not the job for me because I don't really like this and that. Mm-hmm. But other than that, the skill set is really in the deliverables. Mm-hmm. Can they deliver? And using your imagination. I mean, the biggest asset you have in cybersecurity today is imagination. And you can teach yourself Python. You can teach yourself Kali, even I have a box with Kali on it. I mean, come on, it's easy enough to get some of those skill sets and be able to talk about them. But does that mean you can do anything with it? Can you go out and do a pen test? Can you go out and do, some of the things that you're doing on the red team side? No.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that too. The people coming into the industry, I've seen some really creative people, and the best people I've seen so far are not really the ones who have the cybersecurity degrees or all the certifications. They're the people coming from other industries and other career fields. They bring a fresh mindset, and those end up being pretty strong leaders, because we've fallen into a bad habit of following previous leadership that's followed previous leadership way back to the dawn of cybersecurity, back before we even had InfoSec. And back then it was a different culture. Everybody held tight to information. It was not a sharing type environment. And now we want people to be, creative and collaborative and unified. But the problem is a lot of the old leadership still believes in that very close-knit, keep everything close to you type of situation.
Yep, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to open up and say what you didn't do right. Mm-hmm. And you think, well, I'm supposed to, at this point in my career, I'm supposed to have everything figured out, and I'm supposed to be able to have all the answers. But it's one of those things that the loudest man in the room is the weakest man in the room today. Person.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So tell me about your biggest win as an executive throughout any role, whether it be, CTO, CIO, CEO, whatever.
Heck yeah. So I got hired for working for a retailer, and a guy named Bob Wildrick is probably not someone you probably don't know about, but he's probably one of the top retailers in the history of retail, maybe the top 3. So he puts together this team, and the team included myself. And we were going to take this small regional retailer, which I love retail. I mean, really, all business is retail. Everything's retail, good side, bad side, it's all retail. He puts together this team, and we get together. We don't know each other. We don't know whether we even really like each other, any of us. There's 4 of us. I got the technology, you got the CFO, you got the marketing guy, you got the sales guy, and the sourcing guy, and all this, the stores guy. And we go through a 3-day event, and we're trying to figure out what our values are and what the corporate, the different mottos are, different things like that. And Bob wasn't there. He comes in at the end of the event, and he says, what do you guys have? And we had our flip charts, and we showed him what he has. He's like, listen, that's all bullshit. He goes, you guys are idiots. He goes, listen, there's 2 things we're going to focus on. He goes, one is our culture of winning, and the other is we're going to make this company $1 billion company. And I remember sitting there thinking, this man is insane, because I'd already started working there. I was a couple of months into it. Well, we didn't have any money. And in fact, our whole network, you're going to love this. Our whole network was token ring running with passive mouse, but it was all done through the RJ11s. So you would have, I didn't even know it would work. So you would have the back of your PC, you would have a little hairball of wires coming off of your drop cord, and you'd have the 4 wires plugged into the RJ45. And then on the phone side, they used the back end. They were using the RJ11s. So I'm sitting there, he's telling us we're going to make this $1 billion company. I needed a server. We didn't have enough money, so I would buy, like, 1 month I would buy a hard drive. The next month I would buy a case. The next month I'd buy a motherboard, et cetera, et cetera. He says, my point is that I at that point I didn't know what it really took to be successful as a businessman. And I knew I loved being a CIO. I knew I liked retail, but that optimism and that hope, and not more than hope, it's like you commit to something and you believe in something. And I believe this, Mike, I think that one of the reasons CIOs have such a hard time in the boardroom is because we're so intensely critical of because we have to. It's our nature to be critical, because it seems like everything's out to get you. But when you get into that boardroom, which I was blessed enough to finally get a chance to do with the same company, companies don't run off of criticality. They run off of hope. They run off of, look, we're going to be $1 billion company. I'm sitting here trying to figure out how to get a couple $100 to buy some memory for a server, and he's telling me we're going to make this $1 billion company. I get an opportunity. This is a little bit of a long story. I hope it doesn't bore you. So I get an opportunity. Suddenly, I'm the CIO. This guy's all over the place. We're going to make $1 billion company out of it. Probably should have been in Chapter 11 at that point. And next thing you know, I'm in the boardroom. I'm the CIO, and I'm thinking, this is exactly what I always thought should happen. Every board should have a CIO. And you hear this all the time, right? You got to bring the CIO into the boardroom. So here I am. I am today living proof that it works. However, it's not as easy as you think. You don't walk in and the board's saying to you, like, oh gosh, with open arms, look, tell us what we need to do. And I remember before the meeting, the chairman I always got the last slide of the deck, and the chairman before the meeting, before the board meeting, he'd walk up and say, "Are we secure?" And you know what the answer is. I mean, are we secure? Right. No, we're not secure. We're burning down right now. We saved the world last night. Like, I should have a big S on my chest. And I'm like, oh yeah, we're definitely, trying hard to be secure, because that's not what I want to hear. And so I would, give my one slide, and, he'd be back there going like this, because everyone wanted to catch their flights. And anyhow, this all builds to what I think was my single biggest accomplishment, which was when I would get in front of the board after all of this, where the company's growing, I feel pretty good about myself. I can afford to buy a server now. The board decides that they're going to promote me to being a COO. So I'm a CIO. I got the normal weights on my shoulders of being a CIO. Next thing you know, they say, listen, we're gonna give you the stores. So this is a board that allowed the CIO into the board. And then they said, we're going to let you run our stores. So all of a sudden, I've got 3,000 people that report to me. I've got a corporate jet. I'm flying all over the place. And all of these things, that I've never been a better technologist, because I knew what the IT team needed, and I knew what the business also needed. And suddenly, I was able to actually talk to the board in ways that were effective. And we literally saved that company multiple times from a technology perspective, mainly because I had this clarity of having the board, having my peers, as well as having IT, sort of building that strength. And I was kind of in the middle of it. So, getting into the boardroom, no one's really ready for it, because especially from a technology perspective, everything that you've learned as a technologist doesn't work in the board.
Right.
If you think they're going to, be leaning forward in their seats, waiting for you to tell them the answer, you're wrong. I was like a chew toy. It was so bad. So I would walk into the meeting, and when I started giving my one slide I got, they would. So I knew I lost the conversation when they started calling me Spock. So they'd be like, "Oh, you're just being Spock. Yeah. You're just, how many stores you're just trying to spend money." So what I learned was I had to learn not just a new grammar, but I had to learn that it was a different culture than I was completely used to. I was there. I did get used as a chew toy because I deserved it. I wasn't ready for it. In the end, I was ready for it, and I could say things to the board, and they would actually listen to me. And part of it was my bigger role, but more than that, I realized what it takes, what a company's really run on, and it isn't just you coming in and turning the volume to 11, or thinking that because you have your CISSP, because you've bled for that company. You really have. If you're in IT, you bleed for your company. And you work hard, and you stay up late. You do crazy things like leave your family at church and things like that, personally speaking. And so my biggest accomplishment was getting to the point where I was able to actually effectively communicate with my own company. And it was almost like perfect pitch. It was almost like a perfect pitch. We weren't perfect. We sold the company in the end. I told you about that. It didn't work because of the culture. But my single biggest accomplishment was being able to effectively communicate to a company inside of that company in a way that drove us. I'm not saying I was the reason, but we took that company from the brink of disaster to, we sold it for $1.8 billion. It's a public company. So yeah, it was an amazing journey. My biggest technical accomplishment has little to do with technology. It has to do with the wielding of technology and the usage of technology. These guys put a technology guy in charge of stores. Who does that? And we were hugely successful.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the headlines. First up on DevOps.com is an article that looks at the data deluge in the FinServ sector. A decade ago, if you were to ask developers what the biggest challenges in commercial banking were, they would likely cite the difficulty of accessing and collating high-quality data on the day-to-day operations of banking institutions. That has since changed. Developers working in the banking industry certainly have access to more data than ever before, which has created challenges of its own. With so much data being collected, stored, and at least partially processed, some developers have started to talk of a data deluge, an unstoppable torrent that overwhelms the developer's ability to process and use it. This article tries to make sense of this and explores what all this data is being used for, as well as what it means for the future of the banking industry. And we look at 5 ways low code can accelerate digital transformation efforts. Organizations traditionally have struggled with build versus buy decisions when digitizing their internal operations and processes. While the build option offered the benefit of using internal teams or outsourcing to external vendors who could satisfy requirements, the downsides are a long wait, higher costs, and the constant change and maintenance applications require. On the other hand, buying solutions off the shelf meant a one-size-fits-all solution that just doesn't work for every company. Low-code platforms can be an enabler for back-end engineers to use drag-and-drop tools to build UI and business logic quickly. This translates into full-stack skills and makes front-end engineers redundant for internal tooling. With low-code and no-code tools, back-end engineers can create dashboards, transactional systems, processes, and workflows built on top of existing data sources like databases connected via APIs, housed in third-party tools and other areas. These solutions can be easily created and deployed in a matter of hours instead of weeks or months. This article looks at the ways organizations can utilize low code to help accelerate or jumpstart their digital transformation efforts without having to spend extra time and resources. All right, in news, Sentry has acquired Specto, which offers a set of tools for analyzing the performance of mobile applications. Sentry already provides a JavaScript software development kit, or an SDK, that enables developers to insert a small amount of code in their application to track things such as how many times an application has failed. The Specto tools will take those observability capabilities to a deeper level by enabling developers to analyze a wider range of metrics collected. Sentry has worked with partners such as GitLab and GitHub to provide a plugin that makes it possible for DevOps teams to see the same metrics that developers are now using to manage applications. The goal is to make it easier for developers and IT operations teams to collaborate around a common set of metrics. All right, over on Container Journal, we have an article that looks at going cloud native in highly regulated environments. IT divisions working within highly regulated industries are under intense scrutiny, I should say. These environments must carefully deal with sensitive data to meet compliances and corporate standards. This pressure often results in vigorous tooling assessments and heightened due diligence around third-party software vendors. As a result, cloud-native technology is often viewed as too precarious for these walled-off environments. With all of the precautions, it may seem that highly regulated industries have no hopes of really accelerating their growth using cloud-native tools. Unfortunately, this could limit rapid deployment and stunt standardization across the tech stack. However, it doesn't necessarily have to be this way. The myth of on-premises equals high security is being challenged by new approaches like Zero Trust, which aim to treat all actors with the same level of vigilance. This article looks at what organizations in these highly regulated industries need to consider when making the shift to cloud native, including the pressures of regulation and some ways to approach security. All right, over on Security Boulevard, we look at the pervasive people problem in cybersecurity. There is a serious user problem out there, and whether the user makes a mistake or is intentionally malicious, it can impact the entire system and the organization. But is it really a user problem? This is a question raised by Ira Winkler, who is CISO with Skyline Technology Solutions, and Tracy Celaya Brown, who was the president of Go Consulting International, during their session at the recent ISC² Security Congress. They said the user problem is really a cybersecurity people problem. As long as a user has the ability to do certain tasks, click on links, or see a spear phishing email show up in their inbox, they can and they will make mistakes that can take down the network. The problem is not that users cause a loss, but that they can potentially initiate a loss. One person shouldn't have the ability to cause universal panic because of the access permissions they are given. But it happens all the time, and the reason is failure of cybersecurity leadership, they say. This article delves further into their session and offers up some takeaways that hopefully organizations can use to help frame their cybersecurity mindset more appropriately. And we look at the results of a survey by Cisco that found that more than 1/3 of organizations are relying on what they consider to be outdated security technologies. Organizations that upgrade IT and security technologies quarterly are about 30% more likely to excel at keeping up with the business than those that upgrade only every few years, according to the survey, which also noted that security operations teams that integrate people, processes, and platforms see a 3.5x times performance boost over rivals. Automation also more than doubles the performance of less experienced people. The survey also found organizations with integrated technologies are 7 times more likely to achieve high levels of process automation. Organizations that claim to have mature implementations of zero trust or secure access service edge architectures are 35% more likely to report strong security operations. In addition, organizations that leverage threat intelligence achieve 50% faster mean time to repair when recovering from a cybersecurity attack. And finally, we have an article that looks at the need for private-public partnerships in advancing cybersecurity. The federal government is currently handicapped in a way it has not experienced before. Because the digital domain is man-made, governments around the world have different levels of access and freedom of movement within it. In Western democracies, the vast majority of the digital domain is privately held, and thus outside the direct control of their respective governments. In most of these countries, even the backbone of the Internet is outside of the government's purview in all but the most extraordinary emergencies. This means that federal governments cannot effectively operate to provide the same levels of security that exist in the physical world. This fundamental paradox of government power, or the lack thereof, makes partnerships between the federal government and the private sector imperative. Without them, the government cannot effectively provide even the most basic levels of security for their populations. This is also fundamentally not a problem that can be solved through expanded legislation, as the access that would be required for the government to do this on its own would be a real and sizable threat to the Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable search and seizure in the United States. This means the government must work collaboratively with the private sector in ways it has never done before. This article parses out the many ways in which fomenting a public-private partnership can advance and bolster cybersecurity efforts of organizations large and small, and regardless of whether they are privately held, public, or otherwise. All right, that's it for the headlines. Please check back with me tomorrow. I'll have some more for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Israel Barak, who is the CISO over at Cybereason. Israel, thank you so much for taking the time and getting on the Techstrong TV with me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Charlene, for having me.
Great. So I want to talk to you a little bit about a study that you guys recently put out. It's just in time for the holiday season. It is the Cybereason Holiday Ransomware Study. So let's talk about that. Is this the first year that you guys have done this study?
We've actually been doing this a couple of years in a row now. We've been looking at the ransomware ecosystem from a number of different directions and different angles. But recently, we really just announced our newest ransomware research that was really triggered by the joint advisory that CISA and the FBI issued prior to the Labor Day holiday, and then again prior to the Thanksgiving holiday weekend, which is really focusing on what we need to be thinking about when it comes to ransomware and ransomware activities during holidays and weekends.
All right. So So I guess this year's report is probably chock full of goodness because of just the pure number of ransomware attacks that have been making headlines this year. So have you guys noticed a marked increase in ransomware over the last 12 months? And can you tell us some of the trends that you guys notice as part of the study?
Yes, absolutely. I think what we've been seeing over the past couple of years is a sharp increase in ransomware activities of specific type. So in the past, we used to see a lot of ransomware activity that we sometimes refer to as a single stage ransomware. Those are the traditional ransomware activities where they would usually hit one or two endpoints. They would encrypt a couple of documents on these endpoints and ask for money. These type of ransomware attacks, we actually see a steady decline in, but the huge increase that we're seeing is in ransomware attacks that employ a tactic called double or triple extortion, where these are usually human-led operations. So whenever the attack starts, usually there's a human in the loop that directs the attack to achieve maximum impact on the target. And then during that process, what they do is they spread through the network. They make sure to steal data, documents, information from the target environment, and really make it as painful as possible for the target, and really create as many levers as possible to bring the target into the negotiation table. Now, those we're seeing a very, very sharp increase in, and I think specifically, when we look at this most recent survey, we've focused on looking at what happens over holidays, weekends, and off hours, because there's a very, very interesting correlation between very significant attacks that happened in off hours, to put it in other words, we see that these attackers often prefer to operate during off hours because they understand that their target organizations often have skeleton crews during these times, and hence will have longer response time, which will translate to a better outcome for the attacker.
Wow. So considering the fact that we've been so busy this year with with ransomware attacks, and it just seems like there's nobody these days that seems to be immune from falling victim to a ransomware attack. Are there particular industries or sectors that are being targeted more than others, especially during the holiday season?
So absolutely. And I think those were actually some of the focus areas of our briefing with CISA, the FBI, the Secret Service, or around some concrete indicators that we already have about plans of several ransomware groups. So for example, one of the groups that we've been tracking is the PISA ransomware group that just this past couple of weeks released a list of more than 300 organizations they plan to attack in the coming weeks, especially during the holiday seasons. And these are organizations in the healthcare space, the banking space, retail, mining, government, state and local, higher education, and telecoms were the verticals that they were primarily targeting or expecting to target during the coming weeks.
It's interesting that not that I want to give them any ideas, but it's interesting that there weren't so many critical infrastructure, companies on that list. But I imagine that's also a big area of attack for these cyber criminals and their ransomware. Just their actions overall. Is that something that you guys have noticed as well?
It is. And especially when we think about the correlation of that to holiday and weekends, we saw just this past Mother's Day, the attack that targeted Colonial Pipeline. Mm-hmm. And so I think the critical infrastructure is certainly an area of focus, but what oftentimes ransomware threat actors will try to do is to stay on that line that's between making revenue but exposing themselves to lower risk from a retaliation perspective. And so critical infrastructure is often right on that border. So you'll see certain threat actors still targeting critical infrastructure, but many of them try to stay try to focus on industries that will expose them to less risk. Having said that, I think when you think about the industries that are often targeted by these threat actors, even if the industry isn't necessarily defined as a critical infrastructure, it can still have a major impact on the way we live our lives, whether it is the healthcare system, right? Especially during these times where the healthcare system is already so overloaded, right? And so these type of attacks can have a meaningful impact on people's lives.
So, yeah, I mean, and that's terrible to think about, the fact that especially during the pandemic, and who knows when that's going to subside. But it's kind of, well, I would say it's criminal. It is criminal to attack the healthcare industry. And I do remember when the pandemic first hit, there were a number of cyber threat actors who publicly said we're not going to target healthcare, but it's got a big target on it now. So I'm wondering, what's changed? Why the change in heart, I guess, if you will, from the cyber criminals out there? Why all of a sudden is healthcare fair game for them?
I think at the end of the day, it's about making revenue. And what they've identified is that during certain periods of time and on certain industries, certain targets have a higher propensity to pay, right? Or at least to get into some sort of negotiation. And they understand that the more significant the disruption is, the more impactful it is on the target's business, that typically the higher the propensity is to start a negotiation. And so from their perspective, they're just doing good market research. If you think about it that way, we experience this as criminal activity that impacts the way we live our lives. But from a lot of these ransomware gangs' perspective, it's just doing good market research. And I think that also leads us to a certain extent to what we're seeing on holidays and weekends. Because one of the things that they've identified is that they get, when you use marketing terms to describe this, they get higher conversion rates when they operate on weekends. Because what happens is victims usually take longer to respond. They usually spend their weekends at home with their families and friends, and they often come into the office on Monday morning, finding their systems completely locked down and themselves locked out of their systems. And so a lot of these threat actors had shifted a significant amount of their operations towards weekends. And I think in the research that we've done and made public just recently, you can see some of those key numbers. If I may, maybe just some of those key numbers.
Sure.
I think it's interesting to see that while 90% of the responders to that survey are concerned that their company will face a ransomware attack over the holidays, 25%, a quarter of organizations still run skeleton crews, or less, by the way, on holidays and weekends, showing that disconnect between the awareness and what the actual level of preparedness is. 60% of the respondents reported that it takes their organization significantly longer to assess ransomware attacks over a holiday or a weekend. We actually even heard from 70%, which I think is a staggering number of the respondents, that it isn't uncommon for some of the defense staff that gets called in during weekends and holidays to be intoxicated while responding to a cyber attack. So talk about drinking and driving. But
wow.
So these I think are amazing numbers, especially since we know that these threat actors are shifting their focus to holidays and weekends.
Yeah, and I as sad as it seems, I just don't see this changing anytime soon. In fact, I think we're going to see a lot more ransom attacks that really do hit home for a larger group of people. I mean, it's one thing to target, say, a hospital or something like that. That's awful enough. But if instead you're actually targeting, say, the major insurance carriers or somebody like that, all of a sudden it hits home for a lot more people. And supply chain is also another area where I think and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that threat actors are targeting a lot more as well, the transportation industry and those areas that really do impact the supply chain. So, is that something that you guys did notice in this year's survey, that the supply chain is becoming a major target for them?
Yes, absolutely. We've just this past weekend, during the Thanksgiving weekend, there was a significant attack on a major shipping company that's based out of Singapore, and I think this is again, from the threat actor's perspective, is just smart marketing. They understand which targets at the moment will likely have a higher propensity to start a negotiation with them. They understand the immense strain that the supply chain, the global supply chain, is under right now, and the immense strain that shipping organizations are under right now. And in this case, this just past Thanksgiving, it was the Clop ransomware group that really hit home with targeting a supply chain, a key supply chain player.
Yeah, it kind of boggles the mind how much is happening out there regarding ransomware in general, and I think that it would be very easy for organizations to just kind of take a hide your head in the sand approach, because it can be so overwhelming. But obviously, that's not the right thing to do. So, what advice do you guys have for organizations? As we are in kind of the height of the ransomware season, if you will.
So I think there are a couple of things. Certainly, and you mentioned hiding your head in the sand. The interesting thing, based on our research, is that there are two common reasons provided by respondents to the question of why, despite the awareness of the higher risk, why the level of preparedness is still low. And the reasons are that many organizations still believe that ransomware attackers will not target them, since their business is relatively less known, or in other words, the bullet doesn't have our name on it. Right. And other organizations believe that they can manage the risk with cyber insurance, or in other words, if we get hit with ransomware, the insurance will pay the bills. And these beliefs, we call it putting your head in the sand, right? But these beliefs, despite being disproven in multiple pieces of prior research, are still, unfortunately, very common misconceptions. And I think the key factor in changing these misconceptions is oftentimes about bringing the relevant risk data to the executive and board level management of organizations and helping them realize what the risk is for their business. Because unfortunately, and I think it's heartbreaking to see it, but for many businesses, especially when it comes to small and sometimes even mid-sized enterprises, this often becomes a business-ending event, or has a serious impact on employees working for that business, because they need to compensate for the loss in some way. And so when we think about advice, I think that to businesses, I think there are actions that apply to all ranks in an organization. Executives, leaders, workers, and any organization can proactively protect themselves against cyber attacks, including ransomware attacks. Generally, we advise defenders to examine their current cybersecurity posture and implement best practices and mitigations. The most important thing that is specific for this holiday season alert is for security leaders to really ensure staffing and adequate instant response time during off hours. They'll need to identify cybersecurity employees and service providers for weekends and holidays who would be available to surge during these times in the event of an incident or ransomware attack. And this obviously comes above and beyond the traditional advice that we often give businesses around managing risk from ransomware attacks.
All right. Well, if this is this report freely available to folks if they want to take a look at it for themselves?
It is freely available. It is available on the Cybereason website at cybereason.com.
Awesome. Well, Israel, thank you so much for taking the time and talking with me about the report. It sounds both fascinating and horrifying at the same time. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Shirley.
All right, great. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Mike Kaiser, who is in the Strategies and Standards Office of the CTO over at SailPoint. Mike, thanks so much for getting on Techstrong TV with me and having a conversation. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Charlene. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I know you guys recently commissioned a survey called the Trust Issues Survey, which is kind of an interesting topic in and of itself. Workforce behaviors, what employees do, and how, I guess, cyber hygienic they are. Good stuff all the way around. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the report, actually a lot about the report. But first, I wonder if you can let the audience know about SailPoint.
Sure. SailPoint is a company that does things around identity, right? It tries to govern identity throughout an entire enterprise, seeing everything identities have access to, from sensitive data to applications, and then governing it well, and then proving that for our customers that they've governed it well to auditors and others. Basically, it's just part of the comprehensive security strategy built on identity, which, of course, as you know, identity is getting bigger and bigger play these days.
Yeah, and identity is everything, it seems like, especially we're talking about hybrid work environments. We're talking about, the shift to cloud and so many different, even hybrid infrastructures these days. It all, I don't need to tell you, it all depends on identity and making sure that the right people have the right access to the right data. So that it kind of is a good seg, I guess, into this survey that you guys recently did regarding trust issues and kind of a blur, if you will, in the use of technology between work and home, and how employees may be, I don't want to say abusing, but maybe not being as thoughtful about how they use it as maybe they should be. So I'm interested in finding out some of the results of the survey. What were some of the things that you guys found out that really, really surprised you?
Sure. We did the study just because we wanted to see, like we were saying, how identity was being used, especially in our environment in the last 2 years, to be honest, right? We've got worlds colliding left and right. So we did some investigation just in terms of how people use credentials and, their work ID elsewhere, right? Mm-hmm. And there were a couple of things that were fairly surprising, like 93% of Gen Z say they use their corporate credentials elsewhere to create accounts, social media, social logins, which was a little bit shocking. But more shocking than that, I would say, is that the survey is self-reporting people, right? But they said that the older generations, so think boomers, of course, and some Gen Z people, were more likely to be able to identify phishing attacks than their younger counterparts. And they were massively less likely to actually click on attachments or links they didn't know where it was taking them. And I was personally surprised by that.
Yeah, well, as a member, a card-carrying member of Gen Z, I'm pretty happy to hear those results there, because it shows that we're not all idiots here. So let's talk about those results, though. That is kind of surprising. Why do you think so? Because we are, the boomers and Gen Zs, we're not digital natives, and we did not grow up with all this technology, but Gen Y, millennials, Gen Zs, what why is it
right?
What's the way?
It's fascinating, right? Because it wasn't a hard delineation between, say, Gen Z and millennials. It graduated up, right? And the real cliff came actually between Gen Z and boomers. I feel bad saying boomer, by the way.
I know. It's
for Gen Z, they were saying about 46% of them would click a suspicious link, where it was only 1% of the baby boomer generation. My personal theory is that there's been a slow transition to the digital lifestyle among the boomer generation in general. I've known a lot of people who are slightly older than me, not that much older, but slightly older, who were hesitant to do anything online, to shop, to share information, to put, heaven forbid, to use a credit card online. And took forever for that transition. And so I think they are quicker to identify risk, and to be wary of new platforms and technologies, where I think you nailed it. I think the younger generations are more accustomed to being digital natives, and they embrace new technology and see the benefit rather than the potential dangers in general. That's part of it. That's not all of it, though. I mean, I think if you think about it, there are more. Yeah, sorry, I was leading you into questions. There's more subtle things in play as well. If you think about older generations, they tend to use laptops or full-on computers. I would argue that the younger generation, and I sound like someone telling someone to get off my lawn when I say that, but they're used to a mobile device format. And that makes a huge difference in terms of being able to identify, say, phishing attacks or these types of things, which is harder to do for these younger generations. If you think about a mobile device format, there's less information you're presented with. There's less, you can't really see the email. You might just see the display name. So there are fascinating issues of use case and how we design these interfaces to promote or push down the information.
That's a great point. And yes, I agree with you 100% about that. And even being on my phone occasionally, I have to kind of question whether what I'm doing is actually completely legit if I'm answering an email or something, simply because I don't have that information that, to your point, is readily available on a laptop or even a desktop device where you can actually click on the email address and see exactly where it's coming from. And I've done that about 5 times today just to be on the safe side. So Gen X, yay. But it doesn't seem like, maybe technology has kept up with being able to enable, anybody to really understand whether what they're clicking on is truly a threat, especially with mobile devices. So do you think that maybe it's the onus is on the tech sector to create technology that will better enable folks to recognize whether something is really a phishing attack, regardless of what device they're on? Or do you think it's more a matter of there's just hasn't been as much education out there as there should be, or both?
Yeah, I mean, I think the right answer is probably both, right? If I had a startup that was trying to prevent phishing on mobile, I would say, it's obviously product-based. That's the ultimate answer. Reality is always a mix, right? There needs to be some education, but at the same time, I think more and more we're going to start designing interfaces for this smaller format and thinking through it. And maybe I've seen in some versions of email clients now where it identifies at the top of the email, this is coming from an external source. Those types of key flags kind of processes the information for the end user and says, this, you may want to take a closer look at this than you might otherwise. This may not be, an email from, whatever vendor you might be interested in just based on your social media profile. So that's part of it, but also just the training, right? There are things that people can do. There's a whole industry around adversarial approaches to some of this, where they do some testing or send out sample emails and put people a little bit more on their guard, right? And the key there is to do it with them and not to, out people or mock them for failing whatever test you put out there. But
right, yeah. So and that makes a lot of sense. And I wonder, did you guys notice from the survey findings that there were other habits, if you will, that certain generations or certain categories of folks were certain actions or things that they were doing that really did end up putting their organization more at risk, or certain behaviors? I don't know. It just seems like we as many cybersecurity issues that are happening these days, that there's got to be a lot out there.
Yeah, what's really going on, I think, is that worlds, like I said, are blending. Right? Mm-hmm. Especially in the last 2 years, people who weren't used to being online to do certain things like play bridge or chess or whatever moved online because we all sat in the same place for a year and a half. Right. And so enterprises are doing the same thing, but that blurring of lines means that expectations of employees and consumers are changing. So whereas, the survey showed that there were a ton of young people using that corporate email externally. What that means is now that email is out there and it's subject to targeted phishing attacks, right? There's danger for the business. But that's something we need to think about going forward, right? Is to say, what does it mean in a world where identity is not fragmented, or we can have less expectations of identities being fragmented between my work identity and my social identity, or my work identity and my organization, whatever it is, there's some level of ownership that the individual will need to have going forward. We just need to rethink the concept, much like we had that network perimeter where, 10, 15 years ago, you just need a firewall and you'll be fine.
Right.
It was the implied marketing message of some of these organizations. They go, oh, wait a minute, maybe that's not the right, delineation. Maybe that's that split between identities may not live long term. I'm not saying it is to be very clear, I am not saying it's a great idea to just go use your corporate email address, on Facebook or wherever else. That's certainly a bad idea at this point. But let's think through it and think about what the cultural current is underneath it that these numbers are revealing, and then think about ways we can address that. And that's pretty fascinating.
That is really fascinating, and I wonder if it's just a matter of maybe corporate emails kind of going away. Not that I'm advocating that either, but it seems like we've got Google that is kind of the underlying email provider for a lot of organizations and personal emails. I wonder if there's some way that somehow all of this can be kind of aggregated under I don't know, some sort of funnel system that all the emails kind of come in regardless of what the whether it's a business email or a personal email, and then kind of Google works its magic and kind of makes all the bad ones go away. Maybe I'm thinking
no, and the question is, are they reusing it because of some ease of use?
Yeah.
And if so, what is that perceived ease of use? Is it because the work email gets less spam? The work email is, some people have packages delivered at their workplace, or they used to back when they went into work, because they knew they'd be there. They knew that there was someone always there. Is there something like that in play? It's going to be interesting. I do think that, identities will merge over time and put a little bit more in the hands of individual users in terms of, your ID being digital and those types of things. But even then, the enterprise will still need to make decisions based off of, some segment of that identity, and establish policies to make sure that who you are to the business, not just in real life, gives you the right access, as you said, to the right things at the right time. And so, it's just accelerating in that way. But I really like talking about these things just because it's, especially during this time of year, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Right? Because all bets are off in say June, when you're sitting there and you're on the beach. You don't really have a demand to make sure things get delivered or that you can access things with. I would wager, and the survey actually kind of bears this out, is that around the holiday season, the number of people who are abusing their emails or their identities or their work identities goes up because they're using every opportunity they can to shop securely and to get that next gaming device or whatever the hot toy is for this year, right? Because woe betide you if your 5-year-old, wakes up on Christmas morning and doesn't have whatever they need or what they think they need. So it's there's also that in play too. There are emotions there, and so that may play into the use case as well.
Well, I like the convenience idea of using a work or a professional email just as a as kind of the default, simply because, to your point, it would get much less spam. There are more controls on a business email than there are in a personal email. So a lot of that work is actually done for the user. And so 9 times out of 10, they won't get the majority of those spam or phishing emails that a personal email would get. And also, I think, to your point, it's business hours, they're working, they just happen to they get an alert about the PS5, there's availability. So they run and they get on the website and they click and they get it. And it's not until the transaction has been completed that they realize that they actually were using their business email instead of their personal email. So I wonder if there's some of that going on as well. Do you think that this is a conscious effort among these, especially the younger generation, to use their work email? Or do you think it's just kind of, I have 14 different email addresses and, which it's kind of like a roulette wheel, whichever one comes up is the one I'm going to use?
That's a good question. I don't think it's necessarily intentional in most of the cases. I mean, we'd have to go back and take another level of questioning to reveal that answer. I think it's just whatever was there, whatever is available, whatever is handy. I think there are side benefits, but I don't feel like, I'm trying to picture myself in this situation, right? On my mobile phone while I'm watching TV, shopping for Christmas. I'm not really going to put a whole lot of thought necessarily into, I say I have 5 email addresses, which one I'm probably just going to do the one that comes to mind first. And so it's more of a lack of splitting those two worlds, because my world is already blurred, would be the thinking, I would assume. And so why would I false segment that? A follow-up survey might ask, in terms of IT equipment, what do you use your work laptop for personal email? Ever? And I bet you would get an overwhelming majority of people that would say yes. Especially if you broadened it to, do you check, social media or social-based log email in a browser? And then I think you would get a large majority. So it definitely increases the attack surface for IT departments in that sense, and presents a unique challenge. But it'll be interesting to see over the next year as, whatever happens with COVID and whether we're hybrid, fully remote, or people go back into the office, what this is going to mean for identity moving forward and for cybersecurity moving forward, because all of a sudden we don't have a lot of those controls in place because we have such an extended and disparate workforce these days. So I would love to talk to you about this report this time next year and see what's changed, because I think we're going to see some really interesting findings in next year's report. It really is, because every year we'll get more depth and more background and see how things evolve. And with identity's ascendancy and kind of having a moment now, there are just a lot of things in play that people haven't thought about before. Example, like social media login, right? Who do you use your Google or whatever else to log in? Do they own the identity? There's a consortium of banks who've introduced a new standard, just one last little bit here, called the Globally Assured Identity Network. And basically they said, we already have the proofing in place, so why don't we introduce a new standard to share identities that way? And so there are going to be different consortiums, I think, that are going to advocate for establishing that trust and enabling a shared identity kind of model as identity comes up in ascendancy. But like you say, it'd be exciting to see another round of the survey and see what we learn next year.
So if this is this survey available to anybody who wants to take a look at the results?
It is. There's a news release and a blog out on our corporate blog site, and we'll have that link available to you and to your listeners. They can go and read the highlights, and along with some of the sample data. The background, we did a survey with about 2,500 different employees, and it was a company called Dynata that conducted the survey on our behalf. And so the information's out there in both on the press release and on the website.
Excellent. You're going to get me the link so that we can actually include that as well. That'd be great. All right. Well, Mike, thanks so much for having the conversation with me. It's a fascinating topic, and identity, I think as we move forward in this blended world that we're living in, identity is going to become even more important, and it's going to be more complex. I hate to say it as we kind of move forward. We've got to figure out a way to make it safer along the way. So, Mike, thanks again for having the conversation with me, and look forward to having another conversation with you in the future.
And I as well. Thanks for having me, Charlie.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Jimmy Hennessy, who is the Director of Data Science and Software at ACI Worldwide. Jimmy, thank you so much for taking a few minutes and speaking with me today. Do appreciate it.
Great to be here. Yeah, thank you.
Great. So I'm interested in talking to you about something that I personally have never heard of, called fraud management incremental learning technology. But before we dive into that conversation, I wonder if you can share with us a little bit about ACI Worldwide.
Sure, absolutely. ACI Worldwide is a software company, and it specifically looks at the financial services area. So it covers a lot of payment gateways and particularly fraud as well. So it covers a broad spectrum. It has a global presence and is headquartered out of Miami in Florida.
All right. Not too far from where I am. So I'm in South Florida myself. So yeah. So tell me a little bit about fraud management incremental learning technology. It's a new phrase for me. So I imagine if I haven't heard about it, a lot of folks in the industry haven't as well. So let's talk about that. Can you just explain what it is first?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a way of being able to prevent degradation of model performance in production without having to redeploy. So a lot of traditional methods will be you take your data, you teach your model, you deploy to production. Over time, it will degrade. It's a rinse and repeat. And we can use clever methods to auto refresh, but fundamentally, it's a refresh of a model. What we looked at is a way of actually morphing the model in production. So actually changing the model. So it's like a decision tree model. And imagine some of those decision trees just breaking away and we adding new ones based on the different behavioral patterns we see through our systems. So it's a way of kind of keeping an eye out for behavioral changes, but not losing that gap of time between degradation and getting that new model or doing that refresh out there. It kind of bridges that gap together.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So it's continually learning with each refresh. Okay.
Yeah, that would be the main differentiator between the traditional methods, which looks at batch data. We're using what's called an online classifier to see the data as it's streaming through to us and kind of getting insights and kind of making intuitive decisions on if it's fraudulent or not in kind of near real time. And then feeding that back around, do we need to change the model or not?
Great. So obviously we're talking about, in this instance, we're talking about financial institutions and retailers and those more customer-facing or consumer-facing organizations. But it sounds like this is something that actually could be applied in a number of different industries.
Absolutely. Anything that has a behavioral change or a pattern change, it will work the exact same way. Absolutely, yeah. So it has a broad spectrum of opportunity, I think, yeah.
Okay, all right. So can you give me maybe a couple examples of how this is actually being used kind of out there in the field right now?
Absolutely. We did it in 2 phases. So it's actually just released into production actually in the last few weeks, but we did a lot of field study with our clients, and we worked through it since late 2019, and we worked through it. It was probably ready in 2020. We filed for patent in 2020 and successfully got that patent August this year. So what we've done is, obviously all this happened pre-COVID, and we never, obviously during that time, thought that we would ever be in the situation we're in.
Right.
But highly topical to the purpose why we built this is because unexpected behavioral changes across the globe, which we ended up being in. So we ended up using incremental learning against data sets, against our data over that period of time where there was a lot of fluctuation, to really test it and kind of see how robust it was. And it performs really, really well. A side effect which we were not expecting starting this journey was that the whole purpose was just prevent degradation, keep that model as good as possible for as long as possible. Actually, in all our tests, within 1 month, the majority of the models actually improved themselves. Within 3 months, all our tests improved themselves. So it's not something we would guarantee, but it's something we've always seen. It's this evolution of checking itself, tweaking itself, morphing itself, but getting better from that perspective. So it was an interesting find, and again, got us excited and strengthened the case of why we should do this.
Yeah, it's interesting that this technology has come about during the pandemic, when so many businesses were kind of like, their business models were turned on their heads. So many organizations moved online, and they accelerated their digital transformation initiatives. I have to wonder, how did that impact kind of that baselining, if you will, of what is acceptable behavior, and then how the technology then kind of learns and resets and you are avoiding that degradation. And I mean, were there any things that you guys had to do to kind of normalize, if you will, the data from what we would be in non-pandemic or quote unquote normal times?
Yes, we have a lot of data pre and post COVID. So we did have a baseline of pre and what we would normally expect.
Gotcha.
We took specific times, such as seasonality, Christmas period, holiday periods. You know what I mean? What would we expect in that period? Summer periods, particularly around like Cyber Monday, those areas where you would see maybe an increase in fraud anyway, how we would see the data sets change. Absolutely. COVID has changed the way fraud has. It's morphed completely. High ticket price items now are appearing in fraud where you wouldn't have seen it before. There's more, what I would say, kind of fraud that would not be at a large scale. It's more at an individual basis we have seen, rather than large complex fraud rings. We've seen more individual. It's thrown data sets completely out of whack to what they would have normally been. And that's something that has affected traditional machine learning. Absolutely. It's a topic. And our baseline then would have to be pre and post, and then same time periods. But also the volume of transactions, online transactions, has risen significantly. Right. People who've never picked up a phone to purchase anything are now picking up on phones. And the thing about it that is that they won't leave them down now. When all this is past us, there's going to be a whole new demographic of people using technology that may not have done before, we went through what we went through. And that, again, is changing behaviors. There's a whole period that we have to look at. And I think by incremental learning then kind of plays into that a bit. It's like there's no one rule. It's not one moment of time. It's an ever-evolving kind of behavioral changes. So as we move out of this pandemic, we'll see the opposite. We'll see people some go back to normal, some may not come back to normal. And we have to just push data science forward to take all that into consideration. We need to push the discipline to think a new way, I think, just a little differently.
Yeah, well, I agree. And it's a fascinating area to consider when so many changes have been taking place, from a technological perspective over the last, 18, 19 months or so. But even before then, organizations were at least thinking about their digital transformation initiatives and maybe making some of the first steps. And but one thing that I have noticed is that cybersecurity is playing such a large role now in the digital transformation initiatives, whereas before the pandemic, I don't think companies were placing as much emphasis on security as perhaps they should have been. So do you think that with that in mind, and seeing so many issues that have cropped up around cybersecurity, do you think that organizations are really taking a hard look at the technology that they have and the way that they are detecting fraud and other activities, malicious activities, and maybe thinking outside the box, for lack of a better term, but really considering other methodologies beyond what they've always known?
100%. And even to that point, because of some events we've seen that have hit media around cybersecurity and hacks and things like that have happened, we're even finding in the market, even normal modeling is being questioned to an extent. The whole area of bias, explainability, ethical data science has become hugely. There is a more accountability now on data science teams to open that black box and be completely transparent about what they're doing. And I think a lot of that has come by one of the events that have been happening, over the last while. These one-off events or trending of events where we see some security breaches and things like that. It's kind of shook some confidence, I think, out there. So model explainability, we're finding, and the things that we work on ourselves. So for instance, if a model scores highly, why? You know what I mean? What feature drove that decision, or multiple features, and what percentage did they have against that overall score? So it's not a matter of your model says it's fraud anymore. It's why it said it and how it came to that decision. So yeah, absolutely. We've seen a whole thinking process change away from, data science is a black box, to I want to know more. Why is it doing it that way? I mean, tell us more. We need to trust it more. So yeah, absolutely. We've seen that big change. That's it's really a fascinating topic. So your technology, the fraud management, incremental learning technology, do you guys see that this is possibly going to be able to uncover not just fraud as it happens, but maybe some trends, or maybe do some predictive analytics to uncover what might be coming down the pike based on past behaviors? Absolutely. So there's a couple of things where not just incremental learning, but the processes that we do to build the models even now. We're seeing some clever things out there in data sets right now where you might see a fraud ring that's very blatant. But actually, when you strip away all the noise, you'll find smaller fraud rings feeding the larger ones because they know the fraud solutions are going to capture the fraud eventually. Right. So what they need to do is they need to test cards. They need to, test distribution methods of getting product from point A to point B. And you will actually find that a lot of that's hidden in the data sets right now. And rather than we going for that kind of reactive approach of, here's the fraud, here's the labels, let's try to prevent and learn from that, we have to utilize more like link analysis piece, see how all those connections come together to learn more about the people, not just the data. So if you know how these fraud rings work, and we have to take into account that they're complex mechanisms. There's data scientists, there's cybersecurity experts all on the other side as well. So it's not something that is done a lone person, in their room with a laptop. They're complex systems. And I think we have to think more about the people and the behavioral patterns around how these fraud rings and these new fraud work to build better models and better data science techniques to block them. And I think we have to go an approach where it's a morphing, ever evolving way. It's not one size fits all. It has to take into account that as quick as we come up with something, somebody's going to come up with something better. So we need to keep ahead of the game. But I think we'll get to the stage where we'll have data science models pit against data science models, some performing fraud, some trying to prevent it. There's going to be that adversarial approach to fraud, I think. I think we're not far off it. I do think we have to get, I suppose, advance our innovation in a way that can actually counteract that.
So kind of keeping in mind Moore's law, and the every iteration, it kind of doubles. And do you think that this time next year will be just worlds ahead of where we are now when it comes to fraud prevention and using our machine learning and artificial intelligence and being able to be more thoughtful in the way we approach cybersecurity?
I think maybe a year from now, we will still be advancing. I think it'll probably take several iterations and time to get it right. And I think what we need to do is think more about implementing automation into our strategies. So I have a philosophy that your data scientists should be doing data sciences, not model building. If you have a production line of data scientists, you're probably doing something wrong. You need to automate that. We need the experts. And in fraud particularly, not just the data scientists, but the fraud analysts, that combination of people focusing on the innovation piece and moving it forward and then automating it. So where I see we should be moving to in the next few years is automated fraud strategies, kind of like an ecosystem of different technologies speaking together to advance. And I don't think that's scary. And I know some people think, are you taking away the human element of it? Absolutely not. You do need that human input. It's critical. But have that input in a way that's coming up with the new clever things and the approaches. And once you have it got and you got over the line, that the technology and advancements automate, so it gives your team capacity to do something different, do something new. It shouldn't be like, we're delighted about incremental learning, but this can't be a full stop. It's like, what's next? You know what I mean? And after that, it's what next? And to do that, you need to have that capacity within the team to do so. And we feel automation, I think, is key in data science. I have a philosophy of full stack data science. I think your data science team should know the customer, do their data science work, be particularly into the MLOps automation space, monitoring, and it's a loop back around, more moving away from predictive to prescriptive. Make that decision, and then on the back of that decision, do something else. From that perspective. So I think that's the area we need to get to. I really do. Yeah.
It's really going to be interesting to see how the next year plays out in terms of machine learning and artificial intelligence and how it's being integrated even more into all areas of technology, not just cybersecurity, but certainly what a role it will play in cybersecurity moving forward. I'm excited to see what's coming down the pike, and the incremental learning, man, that technology is amazing to think about, and I fully believe it's going to do great things. Jimmy, thank you so much for having the conversation with me. I do appreciate it. It's fascinating technology.
Delighted for the opportunity.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned. Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with a webinars preview. I always tell you we have so many great webinars coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. We have a lot before the end of the year, folks. So I wanted to let you know about 3 that are happening actually this week, so you can mark your calendar and join us. The first one is called How to Monitor Your Business's DevOps Vital Signs. This one is happening Tuesday, December 14th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It is sponsored by Platora. The future is DAO, the Distributed Autonomous Organization. But if we expect our leaders to become transformational and distribute their authority to autonomous teams, we have to give them effective oversight. So this means we need to make our work visible and show progress in DevOps evolution as organizations digitally transform. This webinar will focus on how to use value stream management to supercharge transformational leadership through visibility. So some of the key takeaways of the webinar include what intelligence your leaders need to know, whether their strategy is executing properly, how to connect value stream management to your DevOps tool chain to surface the insights you need, and why your leaders need these insights to successfully manage your business. Good one. Looking forward to that one. The next one is called How to Build a Threat Model for Kubernetes Systems. This one is happening Wednesday, December 15th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It is sponsored by WhiteSource. As Kubernetes adoption grows, its attack surface expands with it, allowing bad actors to find and exploit vulnerabilities in the cloud-native stack. In addition, the complexity of Kubernetes and the lack of proper security controls make the attacks targeting Kubernetes clusters and containers hosted in them a real risk for organizations. With the threat landscape evolving fast, it is critical to understand the security risks and attack vectors in Kubernetes. So this webinar will help you understand adversary tactics and techniques, develop robust defense strategies, and ultimately improve the security posture of your Kubernetes applications. All right, the final webinar is leveraging Kanban with distributed teams. This one is happening Thursday, December 16th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This one is sponsored by Instana. Distributed development teams responsible for different services and spread across multiple time zones do not necessarily have to work in the exact same way as on-site teams. Each team has different priorities and needs to work in a way that facilitates their current work mode. At Instana, they introduced Kanban and leveraged it to gain better visibility into the actual work being done and where bottlenecks occurred. So in this webinar, the folks at Instana will cover how their engineering teams transitioned to a Kanban-based work model and how each team took responsibility for their own service quality. They'll also discuss the challenges, advantages, and even disadvantages of its current work model and share some of the lessons they've learned. And they want to help others who might be struggling with the similar issues. So it's going to be a really great and very interesting webinar as well. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview. Please check back with me tomorrow when I'll have some more for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe. All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, Mitch Ashley is on with his Analyst Corner. And in this one, he speaks with Peter Klimek, who's the Director of Technology from Imperva's Office of the CTO. And they discuss application and API security. Peter's going to give us his predictions for the next year for the security landscape as it becomes even more complex moving down the road. So great conversation. Let's go ahead and get to it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
The pleasure of being joined by Peter Klimek, who is Director of Technology, Office of the CTO with Imperva. Welcome, Peter.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We always start out, let's have you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and also tell us a little bit about Imperva.
Sure. So my name is Peter Klimek. I'm a Director of Technology at Imperva. Imperva is an application and data security company. So we help organizations basically protect their most critical assets, which is, of course, the data that they hold within. And I'm based in Seattle, Washington. I've been in the security industry now for well north of a decade. And prior to that, I actually had an experience or background in software development and still do quite a bit of it, although I'd like to say that I'm more of a reformed software developer at this point.
You come by it honestly then. Well, good. So we're talking about cybersecurity predictions for 2022. It's always interesting territory. I always tell myself, don't worry about it because you're probably going to be wrong. So just share what it is. I'm sure you'll be right. But tell us a little bit about what you're thinking. What are we going to see in 2022?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I would be just really, really happy to actually be wrong about any of these things. I don't think that's going to be the case just because the trends really kind of are pointing more in this direction. And so the first prediction that I'm going to just walk through here is really kind of what I'm seeing more in the realm of development and just the implications that we're going to see on the security side. So the biggest thing is probably that over the last few years, and actually probably the last decade as a whole, we saw a pretty fundamental shift in the way applications were being developed. More and more application teams went from kind of these big clunky web applications to more RESTful-based APIs. And there's lots of benefits, lots of reasons why they did this. And by and large, API security has really been a big challenge for a lot of organizations. Now, one of the kind of the tail on of that and where we see 2022 coming along is what I like to call the great GraphQL caper. So organizations have increasingly started to adopt GraphQL really as that mechanism or that API interface that they're using to be able to actually transmit data between their front-end applications and their back-end services. And there's lots of great reasons for this. GraphQL is really, really a very flexible way of being able to define your APIs. And the way that I really kind of look at it is it's more of a data query language than kind of traditional REST APIs were. And it provides the most SQL-like interface to data. Now, that's where I think the problem really kind of comes into. In traditional REST APIs, when we looked at how an attacker would potentially exploit them, they had to know a great deal about how the API actually worked. Every single REST API operated in its own kind of different nuances, different ways of describing and controlling access to resources. And unless you really had a specification or a Swagger file in those instances to be able to go and access that data, it was still a little bit challenging to do so. GraphQL is a little bit more akin to a SQL-like interface in that effectively, if you just have access to that API, the schema itself is introspective, so you can perform operations for it to describe exactly what you can do. And what that means then is people, attackers in particular, that gain access to those APIs, whether they're externally facing or internally facing, are going to have the ability to basically go and perform large data exfiltration. And so that's one of the first things that I think really kind of comes into play here.
So let me ask you about that. I think one of the beauties about RESTful is it's a very familiar, it's very attribute, argument, command line almost, sort of an API. It's very flexible, of course, and how you interpret data is different formats, JSON and XML, et cetera. What is it about GraphQL? Does it make it more susceptible, or is it just that it's more powerful so you can do so much more once you get access to it?
Yeah, it's just a lot more descriptive in the way that you can access it. And so, a really good example is if we think about like SQL databases. When an attacker has access to a SQL database, the first thing that they need to do is they need to understand what is the actual structure of the database. And so because SQL, ANSI SQL has very common commands like describe table or show table or, those types of things, they have a very quick and easy way to understand what type of data is there. And then they can use that information to really go and help them craft the queries that they need to be able to go and access the data. In the GraphQL world, you have basically these similar functions. The syntax is a little bit different, and the introspection can certainly be disabled on it. But because a lot of organizations use that introspection, especially for their internal APIs, to make it easy for other developers to use, they don't have to go and dig up the documentation. They can just query the actual data source itself. That also provides that blueprint, not only to developers, but also to attackers to be able to actually go and exfiltrate that data.
Okay, great. All right, prediction number 2.
All right, so prediction number 2. This is another one where I really, really wish I was going to be wrong on this one, but the trends of 2021 are just way too strong for it. So the first thing is really, we saw, I guess, as part of 2021 that open source supply chain issues really kind of became part of the parlance of what everyone was really looking towards. And I think what we're going to see here is that attack vector is going to go mainstream, and it's also going to actually become stealthier. And so there's a couple great examples that we saw back in just this year and just recently too, of attackers increasingly realizing that there is open source software really provides a great avenue for attack. So in October, we had the UA parser.js vulnerability. If you go to the UA parser website and you look at who was using UA parser, it was the who's who of the Fortune 100. So it was a massive, massive opportunity for them to be able to go and actually grab credentials. And we also saw something similar with the Koa library also back in early November. And so these types of kind of repo jacking based attacks basically give attackers a really quick and easy way just to go and harvest a massive amount of resources, credentials, basically compromise cloud accounts, you name it. One of the things that I think is going to be more interesting though, in those two vulnerabilities in particular, they were both really sloppy. If we go back and we actually look at it, they were identified really, really pretty quickly because the mechanisms that they used were really kind of more akin to like a brute force smash and grab. One of the things that I just found just recently is there was some great research that was put out by, his name was Wolfgang Ettlinger. I probably butchered his name, but he's from Certitude Consulting. And basically the goal for them was to understand is it possible to actually make one of these open source supply chain attacks, but completely transparent and stealthy to an actual code review? And so what they did is they basically decided that we could leverage things like ASCII control characters that don't show up in order to actually go and completely hide these types of attack vectors. And there's great proof of concepts of this out there. And of course, we know that attackers are just looking at this and seeing that, hey, this is a great idea and something that we could see probably entering the mainstream next year.
Interesting. Well, it seems like a double-edged sword, because while something like that may be very widely used, which means compromise potentially a lot of organizations, my assumption, may be wrong, is it also may get patched much more quickly because it is so broadly used. So why, as opposed to something that's more obscure and you get into the right place, I guess that's always the question is, your target rich environment or just rich target environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where it'll be interesting to see, the difference kind of between those, the nation state actors who actually went for the really, really high value targets, but they did it in a very, very stealthy fashion. The Nobelium group, I think, is of course the best example of this. And Mandy actually just today just released new research on some of their tactics, techniques, and procedures or processes that they're using. And it's amazing to see how much they've evolved, but then other nation state attackers are also evolving with it as well. In cybersecurity, normal cyber criminals are using this as almost a playbook and their own kind of versions of this too.
White hat unintentionally helping the black hat. Okay, prediction number 3.
All right, so this one's a little bit different. This prediction is actually going to be a slightly more legal prediction than it is anything else. So the big one here that we're seeing is the potential for bots to actually get greater legal clarity. Specifically, one of the biggest issues that retailers have been dealing with for the last several years, but it really kind of hit just a massive new high point, is specifically Grinch bots or inventory hoarding bots. So the types of bots that go out and they buy up all of the holiday products before anyone really has the opportunity to. And this problem became really acute, not just because of the pandemic and more people doing online shopping, but also because of the related supply chain issues that we have. So manufacturers like Sony for the PlayStation 5, even if they wanted to go, and they certainly do want to go and meet all the demand that's out there for their systems, they simply cannot because the supply chain is so constrained. Now, because of this just makes it more valuable for bots to go out and to actually snatch up all of the inventory that's out there, which of course causes a lot of grief, not only to consumers, but also to the retailers themselves. So if we go back to 2015, 2016, around that time frame, the government released the Bots Act, which basically provided a legal clarity or definition around ticket scalpers. And so basically bots that were going out and buying concert tickets and event tickets and things like that. Namely, what they didn't do, though, is they didn't actually cover any other types of bots that were going after anything else. And so just recently, actually just last week, we finally had legislation that was introduced by Representative Tonko, and this is the Stopping Grinch Bots Act. Now, of course, it's got to make its way through Congress and the Senate and everything, but ultimately they did one thing that was just really, really smart here. They just basically copy-pasted the old Bots Act and did a quick find replace on ticket bots and replaced it with Grinch bots in the inventory hoarding. And so it follows the exact same legal framework, which was able to actually pass through Congress and Senate and be signed into law with bipartisan support. And so I think next year, given some time for this to work through, we'll at least get greater legal clarity around this issue. And it's not going to stop the bot problem for all of the retailers that are out there, unfortunately. But one of the things it will do is at least give them a better legal footing to be able to go and work with the state's attorney generals to actually go and start finding some of the worst of the worst.
Verifying what illegal activity is. So
exactly.
Say this is wrong, go after them. Okay, good, very good. Well, I'll keep an eye on that. I didn't know that the Grinch bots legislation was moving through. So there's an interesting theme, I think, in your 3 predictions. And one of them is that there are things that, they are 3 years out or 5 years out. So who knows? You can say anything you want right about a prediction. And because you probably are going to be wrong, but also things will change enough you can claim you're right. Maybe be true. So the things that could or should or may happen within the next year. I think another aspect of it is, of course, we're talking about software and API economy, and the rise of API security is, I think is one of the fastest growing trends in the security, not just market, but on, from CISOs to security professionals, especially folks that don't necessarily claim to understand software super well.
Right.
I'm curious about that. Do you see that as more of an agenda item for the dev teams, or the security professional teams? And maybe they're just asking the dev team to take care of it.
So my initial gut reaction is the answer is both. When we've worked with organizations on developing API security strategies, it never works well if it's just the security team that's really going and pushing down this mandate. And similarly, whenever a development team, basically, no matter how well-intentioned they are able to go and basically start to enforce this capability, they're only limited to their individual silo in the domain that they really kind of work with. And so what we ultimately see that works best here is when the two teams really come together and they develop effectively a center of excellence around saying, these are the standards that we're going to operate in. This is how we're going to define, document, secure our APIs. And then they're able to basically push that out broadly across the organization as a whole. Now, one of the trends that we are watching that I think is really interesting, and APIs certainly enable this, this will probably be a good one for kind of that more 3 to 5 year timeframe, is the proliferation or kind of the increase in low code or no code platforms that really make interfacing and working with these types of APIs much, much easier, not only just to developers, but also to just, normal business analysts. We still haven't quite seen to the level of, for all the kind of talk about the low code, no code platforms, we haven't quite seen people really entrusting that data and really sensitive data types to those business analysts just yet, at least in a large scale fashion. But we can certainly see them coming more and more down the future. And as these platforms become more commonplace, they'll become on the radar for the security teams to have to go and actually deal with as well.
What's interesting, and you mentioned low code, no code, especially low code, is there's also an increase in adoption by IT organizations themselves.
Yes.
Whether that being sort of, it's gone from a business unit to getting IT's help to IT helping, or IT building their own apps in low code, no code. So that might actually help accelerate sort of the view into API security, if it's the IT organization or IT with security, that could sort of flow out to the business units, as opposed to waiting for something to break and then we have to go fix it.
Yeah, exactly. And for the security team, because there's just so much now for them to have to go and handle, by and large, the best thing that they can do is just put sensible guardrails around these processes, and the teams, they really can't get in the way of them. I mean, security for years just kind of got, just yelled at for being the team of no and constantly trying to just, impede a lot of these teams. And really the better way to do it is just to establish the guardrails, say, this is what's safe for you to do. This is what we can't have you doing without, going through your proper SDLC checks and everything else that have really been developed and built with the full application development teams over the years. And so we do see that as being something that will probably start to emerge more and more. Now, does that mean that we'll probably see a large data breach? Probably.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, very good. Appreciate you putting yourself out there with some predictions and sharing some of your knowledge and expertise and view on the market as well. Well, thank you very much, Peter, for joining us today. I hope you'll come back and share some more. Maybe we'll come back and see how we do.
we can grade the predictions, and like I said, I would love to be wrong. It'll be great news if I'm wrong on these.
Yeah, sometimes those are tough predictions to be right about. Great. Well, Peter Klimnik, who is with the Office of the CTO Director of Technology with Imperva. Thanks, Peter. Great to talk to you.
Thanks again.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Rounding out today's Techstrong TV broadcast, we have The View with Vizard, in which Mike Vizard speaks with Alan Chang, the Vice President for Technical Operations at Inspur Systems. They discuss why AI requires open infrastructure platforms. Interesting technology, interesting conversation. Let's roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Alan Chang, who's VP of Technical Operations for Inspur. We're talking about open platforms and AI. Alan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We've seen a lot of innovations in AI lately, but it seems to be always driven by some sort of proprietary platform in one shape or another. What will the role of open architecture be as we move forward, and how close are we to getting to the point where the infrastructure we're using to build all these AI models is open?
So, Michael, you're absolutely right. I think it has been a proprietary AI development for quite some time, right? A lot of people have to pick up proprietary stuff because the software stack and then the hardware stack. And I think the OCP community recognized that as well. And then that's why the initiative of having an open platform based on the same connector pin model and definition for all the silicon developers to actually come together and saying, hey, I'm willing to actually develop something on it, right? The similar concept and using the same connector. Giving everyone has the same platform and customer, especially on the customer side of it, right? They have an apple-to-apple comparison, and which best silicon will actually win out for their internal evaluation and things like that. And that provide the first step going forward in terms of the silicon leveling up the playing field. But of course, right, the next step is how do we make sure the software side of it, the framework, right, is going to having the same level playing field like the silicon going forward down the path.
Do you think the silicon will be optimized for machine learning and deep learning algorithms more so than it is today? And that's part of the investment we're seeing people make?
Absolutely. I think before we might have one or two really big silicon developer, right, who has a little bit edge on the side of it. But as you can see, the big cloud service providers, right, such as Google, they feel the AI is definitely the trend, and then the usage, the consumption they're going to have in the future will definitely balance out if they invest themselves, developing their own silicon. I think that trend has been, I've seen a lot of customers thinking about the same thing, at least having that conversation started, right? So I think there's going to be more silicon for targeted application. And actually imagine AI is still a very broad topic, right? There's visual recognition, there's voice recognition, there's so many different applications can use upon it. But I don't think all the application could be satisfied with just one simple silicon, because that's, again, way too general purpose again, right? And then all this application has a really big market behind it. I think it eventually has to come with a specialized silicon.
How do I balance the need for specialization to drive an algorithm at a higher level of performance and openness and not get locked into that particular platform because I went too deep on the SDK or whatever it might be?
Yeah, it really depends on I think it's the economy of scale, right? If we're talking about the AI conversation, 5 years ago, everyone will say, yeah, I can use a CPU to do the AI, right? I don't really necessarily having an accelerator behind it. But the economy of scale, how the AI application was adapted across the enterprise, across the organization is widely, accepted. And I think that's when the company or the end user decided saying, hey, I need some acceleration, right? The investment for that special cluster specific for AI, instead of leveraging what I have in my data center and then just kind of leverage it, it didn't make sense anymore, right? And then as we develop and seeing more application, more specific application, right? Like we talk about, like the visual stuff and then the voice recognition stuff. Once we have an economy of scale of that visual, of that particular application, I think a lot of customers are willing to invest into a proprietary silicon or specialized silicon, we'll say.
Do you think all this stuff is going to run in the cloud, or at some point will more of it run on premise and we need to figure out what the mix is going to look like? Will the whole thing become hybrid?
Well, I do believe the initial step in the next 5 years or so, it will be kind of hybrid in some way, right? If I'm an organization, I will probably want to pick one or two applications I really want to tackle the problem with, right? You can imagine the organization doesn't have unlimited resources to do everything at the same time, right? And I want to find out where my pain point is, what hurts me the most, or what benefit me the most, right? And then use that as one of the application or two applications to start out my AI journey, right? But as it goes along the way, I think there will be a cloud service provider will also try to offer something a little bit more application specific or vertical specific, right? And for an organization to invest that too much money to something specialized, I don't think it's reasonable, and I don't expect that. So having the hybrid mode allow organization to have the flexibility, saying, hey, these are the two problems I want to tackle right now, right? And I want to have it on premises, and I'm gonna invest my 100% of my energy onto it. But if there's an application on the side, I feel it's a long-term strategy. I want to understand how it works, right? And to get a feeling about it. And I might use a hybrid mode, right? To get my foot wet and then understand how it is, what it means by having that kind of AI in my organization. And that will be what I'm foreseeing in the next 5 years or so.
We see a lot of different processors at work here. GPUs are used to train, x86 more often used for inference. We see ARM processors and all kinds of stuff floating around. Is this going to be very much a polyglot kind of processor architecture? And how do I build something that can run across all those things when I need it in different places? Is that part of my strategy?
Yeah, well, it's an exciting period of time, I would say, right? When I'm becoming a customer, or am I being a customer or a system developer, I'm more excited to seeing options, right? Of course, like when there's too many options, it become a little bit trickier to actually find out what's the best for you, right? But I'm excited to see all this developer, even the big silicon developer, right, or the startups, like who has a really nice concept and then the algorithm behind it. I think as an engineer, right, I'm excited to see all these differences. And what I would say is, you make a reference, right? Today, AI, a lot of training was happening on the accelerator, the GPU card, right? And a lot of inferencing was happening on the CPU side of it. But I also see a trend when my customer reaching a certain threshold of what they call the inferencing need, right? They start, again, seeing a acceleration need, right? Should I using so many CPU to do my inferencing, or so should I building a specialized cluster special for the inferencing again, right? Similar to what the AI conversation was talking about. So yeah, like, and that comes back to your first question, actually, Michael, right? Think about how does the open source platform provide a apple-to-apple comparison, right? Can the ARM to be compatible to x86? How does that work? And does this particular vendor's GPU card compatible to the other vendor as well? Before the open source initiative, there's no apple-to-apple comparison. You always find some OEM has a proprietary system set up, right? And then it's very different than the other OEMs, right? And then when you have two systems in-house, try to compare the performance, you want to baseline of, is this two OEM the same quality, and then are they benchmarked at the same standard, or simply I'm testing this combination just because the OEM that provide me this particular system is actually better OEM than the other. So sometimes it's hard to do that comparison. And right now, I think the open compute initiative does have that playing field level, and then everyone has a chance to actually to compete.
So what should people expect from OCP going forward in this regard? I mean, are there playbooks, specifications, reference architectures? How does this all come together?
Well, I would say reference architecture is for sure. It's going to be definitely one thing really important, because seeing a concept and reading on a paper, sometimes you just don't get a feeling about it, right? And then your application, your framework is always different than the other people. So having that reference platform available as a physical system, right? What I call that as a concept to product, right? Concept to product and silicon to product. When you have a physical product that's available and for everyone to test around and to play around, and then that's when the real benchmark, right, really happening. And then the significant differences, and that's when it shows up. And I think that's really important to everyone in the open community right now, is trying to have a set of standard. And then let me kind of also put it this way into hardware development, right? Open source hardware is very different than open source software, because software people can, as an individual, I can contribute a couple of the lines of code and then make a really big difference, right? And it's easy and it doesn't require a lot of investment. I probably need to get a really nice laptop, right, to do and networking and things like that to actually to input that code. But hardware development really costs a lot of money, as you can imagine, right? Silicon side of it, even the sheet metal, right? And then the motherboard itself and all that stuff. Having a standardized reference platform allow different ODMs, right? Taking a different approach. I can say company A is going to develop a combination of silicon and accelerator. Company B is going to develop a silicon, a different combination, right? And then a company C. As an end user, I don't have to count on one company to develop everything, all the combination, because the matrix is too big for any company, hardware company, to develop all that, right? The investment is way too big. But having a standardized platform, a reference platform, a guideline, allow every company, hardware company, to have the same baseline, right? And then as an end user, I can pick one from Inspur, I can pick one from the other OEMs, and I know for sure there's no difference on the fundamental of it. And then the combination the combination of the different silicon and different software will determine what's really the best for me.
So what's your best advice to people right now as they kind of think about their AI strategy? And it's usually all about the software, but from a hardware perspective, what should they be thinking about?
So I will say, as a starter, right, if you just the first time to actually trying out building something on premises, right, make sure you have a software stack that's already working, right? Develop it on the cloud, right? If you want to do that, and that's an easy way to do it. And then develop it on the cloud, make sure you have a software stack, and then you actually tackle your application and workloads and things like that. And then when you come to the hardware selection, right, you can reference to what you see on the cloud, because you can see Google Cloud, AWS Cloud, Microsoft Cloud. They always specifically talk about what kind of hardware was behind it, right? Amazon has a ARM processor of their own, right, offering on the cloud as well. And when you do that, right, start migrating to the hardware choice. And then, of course, the first choice is you try to mimicking what you were using, right, exactly on the cloud. But after you have that, and try to talk to more OEMs, right? Try to talk to everyone, right? Try to talk to everyone and understanding, hey, this is what I'm using on the cloud, and I think this is my direction, right? Do you have other experience, right? Is there other better choices? Because most of the OEM like us definitely was selling multiple different platforms, and we might have a benchmark comparison internally based on your comparison, and then we can share that with you. And then once you have collected that information, I think you can make your conscious choice. For Inspur, the thing we do, we want to make sure everyone has the same condition is we develop everything based on Intel, AMD, Ampere, using the same architecture, the way the system look almost identical. If you don't look close enough, right, to the sockets of that silicon, you will not able to tell the difference between the three silicons. We have it intentionally make it exactly the same. 80% of the equipment components are the same, right? So you are truly compare everything apple to apple to apple between the three silicons. And the same thing applies to the GPU cards as well. You want to make sure you have the apple to apple comparison, because this is how I educate myself too. Because when a silicon provider comes to me, they tend to talk about the good stuff, right? They tend to show the strong suit of what they have. But in order for me to truly find out which one really benefit my customer, I have to have an apple to apple comparison myself. So that's what we do, and that's why intentionally we do that. And I think a lot of customers will really enjoy that as well.
All right. Well, they say the first thing to do is to measure twice, so you only deploy once, but you got to figure out what you're measuring, and it has to have the same apples to apples comparison. Otherwise, you're measuring the wrong thing altogether. Yeah, Alan, thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, well, that rounds out today's Techstrong TV broadcast. It was a long one, like I said. I hope you enjoyed all the conversations. We had a lot of really great conversations on today's show. We're going to have some more tomorrow, too. We've got another Techstrong TV news Techstrong TV broadcast for you. We have this week, and then we have next week filming, and then we have Monday, December 20th. That's going to be our last episode of the year of new content. We're taking a very short hiatus over the holidays, and then we'll be back on Tuesday, I believe it's January 4th, with a new broadcast. But like I said, we do have this week, next week, and Monday the 20th to get through, and then before we take our break. So I do hope that you'll join me tomorrow for another Techstrong TV broadcast. Until then, I hope everybody has a really great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.